fire stands straight up into the Carbon County night, swallowing a house a man spent 14 months building with his own two-fingered hand. The whole town stands in the street. Nobody runs. Nobody lifts a bucket. In that crowd, a red-haired woman isn't crying. She's counting. Counting the two strangers at the edge of the firelight, the only two who aren't bothering to look upset. Counting the sheriff with his hands in his pockets and his hat tilted down, looking at no one. 4 days later, 3 horses come up the South Road. They stop 12 feet from the porch steps. Someone trained them to that distance. The woman doesn't look up. She keeps stitching. Because in the back room behind her, there's a floorboard she's left loose for 5 years. And under it is something stamped with the initials of a man 9 years dead. Her fingers hook into the gap and lift. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet. That particular shade of gray, not quite on, not quite dark, sat over Harlan's crossing the way trouble sits before it announces itself. Patient. Heavy. Already decided. Ren Rourke sat on the porch. Just sat there. Top step. One knee up, the other leg stretched long against the worn boards. A leather yoke across her lap. A curved needle working through it with the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone whose hands know the job well enough that the mind can be somewhere else. She wasn't somewhere else. She was exactly here, watching. The street below had one general store, one saloon, one church with a cracked bell that hadn't rung properly in 2 years, a livery, a blacksmith forge gone cold since August when the smith packed up and moved to Colorado without saying goodbye to anyone. Row of houses going west, getting smaller and more beaten as they went, like the town was losing confidence in itself the further you walked. Harlan's Crossing, Carbon County, Wyoming Territory. Population 300, give or take whoever had left last month without updating the count. Ren had been here 5 years, long enough to know every sound the street made before the rest of the town woke up. The Cooper's Rooster 3 houses east, always 3 calls, then silence. Never 4, never 2, always 3. The livery sign creaking on its chain when wind came from the north. The particular groan of the saloon's front door when Maybelle unlocked it at 6:15, even though she never opened for business until 10. 5 years of mornings. 5 years of the same sounds in the same order. She knew everyone. So she heard the horses before she saw them. 3 sets of hooves, coming from the South Road. Not the careful, tired rhythm of men who'd ridden all night, not the loose, easy canter of cowboys heading in for breakfast and whiskey. These were horses being ridden with purpose, controlled, the specific pace men set when they want to arrive, looking unhurried but mean every step of it. Ren didn't look up. She kept stitching. The needle went through the leather, pulled back, thread tightened. She ran her thumb along the seam to feel whether it had seated right. It had. The 3 riders stopped 12 feet from the bottom of the porch steps. She could see their boots in her peripheral vision without lifting her eyes. Good boots. Not working boots. Decorative stitching. Leather that hadn't cracked yet. Paid for, not earned. One horse snorted. Stamped once, then silence. Then the man in the middle, she'd placed him there, by the way the other 2 angled slightly toward him. The unconscious lean of men deferring to a center of gravity cleared his throat. "Ma'am." Ren kept stitching. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to hear me clearly." The needle went through again. She held the work up, examined the seam angle in the gray morning light. "This property has been purchased by Mr. Aldous Dorn on behalf of the Union Pacific Railroad. You are currently occupying a structure on land that belongs to Mr. Dorn. You'll need to." "I heard you," Ren said. She didn't look up. The man stopped talking. She could feel the 3 of them recalibrating, exchanging glances she wasn't looking at. The mental arithmetic of men who expected a particular response and didn't get it. "Then you understand." "I heard you," she said again. "I didn't say I was listening." Beat. Long one. The middleman made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff. The sound men make when they're deciding between amused and dangerous and haven't landed yet. Mr. Dorn's title to this property is recorded at the county office in Orleans. It is legal. It is binding. And you are stitching, Ren said. "I'm stitching." I've got about 4 inches left on this seam, so you might as well finish what you rode over to say while I finish what I started. Another beat. One of the other two shifted in his saddle. Leather creaking. The sound a man makes when he wants to say something but is waiting to see what the man in charge does first. The man in charge did not seem to know what to do. "This is not a conversation," he said. Voice gone flat. Men who go flat are men who've decided something. "This is a notification. You have until Friday to vacate these premises, or Mr. Dorn will be forced to." "It's Monday," Wren said. "Yes. You're giving me 4 days." "That's correct." She finally looked up. Not fast, not dramatic. Just lifted her eyes from the leather and looked at the man in the middle, the way you look at something you want to understand. Mid-30s. Clean-shaved, wide jaw. The kind of face that hadn't been hit enough times yet to know what that felt like. "Tell Mr. Dorn," she said, "that I'll give him the same consideration he gave the Beaumont family." Something moved behind the man's eyes. Not his face held, but behind it. "Friday," he said. "Good morning," Wren said. She looked back down at the leather. The three of them sat there another 22 seconds. She counted. Then the horses turned and the hoofbeats went back south, fading the way sounds fade in cold morning air when the ridges are close. The Cooper's rooster called. Once. Twice. 3 times. Silence. Wren tied off the thread, held the yoke up, ran her thumb along both sides of the seam, seated even. She set it down and picked up the coffee cup she'd brought out 40 minutes ago and forgotten. Cold now. She drank it anyway. Her name was Wren Rourke. Not a common name. She'd had that pointed out to her more times than she could count, mostly by women who thought naming a daughter after a small brown bird was either poetic or unkind, depending on the woman. Her father had named her. He'd said, the one time she asked, that wrens were the toughest birds alive for their size, nested in impossible places, rusted pipes, porch eaves, rock crevices that seemed too small to hold anything living, sang loud enough to be heard over rain. He'd said, most people spend their whole lives trying to be eagles. Wrens just get on with it. He'd said a lot of things. She tried not to think about that before noon. She usually failed by about 8:30. Harlan's Crossing had been her home for 5 years. Before that, 2 years in Laramie City doing piecework for a tailor who paid poorly and asked too many questions. Before that, 18 months in Cheyenne working the counter at a dry goods store, until the owner's brother-in-law decided he wanted both the store and the woman running the counter, and Wren decided he was wrong about that. Before that, a year she didn't like to account for, moving between places too small to have proper names, learning what she could, staying nowhere long enough to matter. And before all of that, a childhood in the high country north of Laramie, a house with a leaking roof and a smokehouse out back. A man who taught her things other girls weren't being taught. She did not think about that before noon. She failed at that too. The town had been settled in the early 1870s, a mix of ranchers, homesteaders, working their Homestead Act claims, former soldiers from both sides of the late war who'd decided they were done with everything east of the Mississippi, and the kind of drifters who eventually stop drifting because they've run out of energy rather than reasons. Not a prosperous town, but it had been quiet, had been. Aldous Dorn arrived 14 months ago, with a leather satchel full of documents and a letter of introduction from the Union Pacific Railroad's regional office in Cheyenne. He'd rented the largest room at the only boarding house, set up an office in what had been the barber shop. The barber had retired to Colorado the previous spring and begun meeting with landowners. The meetings were polite. First round of them, anyway. He was a man who understood the value of politeness. 56, 57, somewhere in that range. Silver-haired, thin-faced in the way of men who were never quite heavy enough to be comfortable. Eastern suits that cost more than most families in Harlan's Crossing made in a season. He spoke carefully and listened with his whole face, the way some men do when they've learned that listening is often more useful than talking. He made offers. Below market. Below fair. Made in the voice of someone doing you a favor. And some people tired people, scared people, people who'd already seen what happened to those who refused signed. Those who didn't sign had other conversations. Different conversations. Not polite. The Caldwell family, 40 acres of bottomland east of the creek, had their fence line cut 3 times in 1 month. Their well went bad. The eldest son, coming home from Rawlins one evening, was beaten on the road by 2 men who were never identified. They signed on the 1st of August. The Winthrops, a widow and her 2 daughters running a small dairy operation north of town, had a fire in their barn in September. Small, controlled. Not enough to do real damage, just enough to be a message written in smoke. They signed 2 weeks later. The Beaumonts had not signed. George and Della Beaumont, 63 and 61 respectively, had held their 160 acres under the Homestead Act since 1872, built the house themselves. George had lost 2 fingers on his right hand to a circular saw at a mill in Ohio before he came west, became ambidextrous out of necessity. Built the house in 14 months, working mostly alone. 5 acres of winter wheat, 2 dairy cows, a mule, a pig, a kitchen garden that Della tended with the intensity of someone who understood what having food meant. They refused to sell. On a Thursday night, 4 days before those riders showed up, on Wren's porch, the Beaumont house burned. Not a warning fire, not a small controlled message. The whole house, the barn, the smokehouse, the kitchen garden, the fencing around it. George and Della got out with their lives and the clothes on their backs. George tried to go back for the strong box under the floorboards, deeds, savings, 40 years of carefully folded documents, and Della pulled him back so hard she wrenched her shoulder. The strong box burned. The town stood in the street and watched, not because they didn't care, because scared people watch and say nothing and know they will be ashamed of it later and do it anyway. Wren had stood in the street too. She'd watched the way you watch something you're filing away, each detail going somewhere specific. The 2 men at the edge of the crowd who weren't from Harlan's Crossing and weren't pretending to be upset. The way Sheriff Emmett Callum stood with his hands in his pockets and his hat tilted slightly down, not looking at anyone. The absence of Dorn himself he hadn't come to watch. A man confident enough not to need to witness his own work. She'd gone home that night, sat at the table in the back room, the one she used for sewing, for eating, for being alone, and looked at the wall for a long time. Then she'd looked at the floorboard in the corner, the loose one. She'd found it loose the first night she moved in from whoever lived there before and had decided to leave it that way. Sometimes you need a loose floorboard. She'd looked at it for a long time. Then she'd gone to bed. The second morning, the 3 riders came back. Different time, late afternoon, the light going golden across the street. Same 3 men. Same horses. The man in the middle had changed his shirt, but not his approach. Wren was on the porch, hemming a pale blue cotton dress. Second pass on the hem. She kept her eyes on the needle. "We gave you until Friday," the man in the middle said. "It's Tuesday," Wren said. "Mr. Dorn would like to discuss accelerating the timeline, then Mr. Dorn can come discuss it himself." Pause. "Mr. Dorn doesn't generally." "I know what Mr. Dorn generally does," Wren said. "I've watched him do it for 14 months. He generally sends men with good boots and bad intentions to do his talking. Tell him I'll have the same conversation with him that I'm having with you." She tied off a length of thread and bit it clean, which is to say, no conversation at all. The man looked at the man on his left, at the man on his right, back at Wren. "Friday," he said. "Final." "Good afternoon," Wren said. They left. She started having trouble sleeping. Not from fear. She'd felt real fear before, the kind that drops your stomach and makes your legs uncertain, and this wasn't it. This was something more like the feeling before a storm that hasn't arrived yet, when the air pressure shifts, when the birds go quiet, when everything is waiting for something it can't prevent. Anticipation, or maybe recognition, like something she'd been pretending wasn't coming, had finally arrived, and the pretending was over, and there was a strange relief in that. Strange and terrible and completely unwelcome. She lay in bed the second night and stared at the ceiling and thought about the floorboard. Thought, don't. Thought, this isn't yours to fix. Thought about the Beaumonts in Clara Hinshaw's spare room. Della with her wrenched shoulder. George with his ambidextrous hands that had built a house and watched it burn. What 160 acres under the Homestead Act means to people who've worked it for 15 years. What it means to lose it. What it means when no one comes. Thought about her father. She usually didn't let that happen before midnight. Failed by 10:15. Cole Rourke had been many things. She'd been working on that list her whole life, adding to it, revising it, crossing things out. It started when she was very young as the man who taught me things, then became my father, then the best rider I've ever seen, then the most frightening person in any room. Then later, much later, the way feelings sharpen when they've had time to process. The only person who never once treated me as though I was less than I was, which was its own complicated thing, because Cole Rourke had also been gone, 9 years gone. Killed so, said the report that reached her in Cheyenne in the spring of 1878 when she was 17 years old, working in a boarding house, doing laundry, and trying not to think about where he was killed in a gunfight outside Laramie City. An argument over cards, they said. A man called Bellingham, details unclear. Her father had gone for his gun and Bellingham had been faster. She hadn't believed the part about the cards. Cole Rourke had never played What's for Money. He thought it was foolish. Gambling with strangers, he'd told her once, is just paying for an education in how stupid you are. But the gunfight she'd believed, because that was always how it was going to end. That had been the shadow over their whole life together, not a fear exactly, more like a given, a mathematical certainty. He was what he was, and what he was had a particular kind of ending, and she had understood that the way you understand that winter comes regardless of what you want from the calendar. She'd grieved. Badly. Privately. In ways she would not describe even now. And then she'd gotten up, because Wrens just get on with it. Third morning, she was on the porch when the sun came up. No sewing this time. Just coffee. Watching the light come over the eastern ridge, not gradual, sudden, like someone turned a lamp on in the next room. The way high country light arrives. She was thinking about the floorboard, thinking about the look on Della Beaumont's face when she'd passed her in the street the day before. Not defeated. Worse than defeated, resigned. The particular expression of a person who has decided the world is what it is, and there's no point wasting energy being surprised by it anymore. Wren didn't believe in that expression. She'd seen it too many times, on too many faces. It was the expression that made things like Aldous Dorn possible, not the Dorns themselves, but the ground they walked on, the silences they planted their boots in, the spaces where someone should have spoken and didn't. She set down the coffee cup, went inside, stood over the corner floorboard for a full minute. Then she crouched down, hooked her fingers into the gap along the edge, and pulled it up. The box was there. It was always there. She'd carried it from Cheyenne to Laramie City, to 3 towns without names, and finally to Harlan's Crossing. Put it in the floor of every room she'd ever rented the same way other women put things in hope chests or under beds. Cedar, or had been once. Years of handling had worn the surface to something more gray than red. 14 inches long, 8 wide. The lid fit snug enough she had to use her thumbnail to break the seal. She opened it. Inside, 1 Colt single-action Army revolver, 0.45 caliber, barrel length 4 3/4 inches. The finish worn to a kind of soft gunmetal that held light differently than new metal. The way things look when they've been used and survived, and been maintained with care over a long time. Dark walnut grip, worn smooth where a right hand holds it. On the left side of the frame, small and precise, stamped into the metal before she was old enough to read. Cease R. Cole Rourke. She picked it up, turned it once in her hands. The weight 1.5 pounds or thereabouts settled into her palm the way a thing settles when it belongs there. She set the Colt aside. Below it, a cleaning kit, a small leather pouch with 20 rounds, a folded square of oilcloth, and underneath all of that, pressed flat against the cedar bottom, as though placed there with deliberate care, a piece of paper. She had not opened this paper in 3 years. Last time she'd opened it, she'd held it for about 30 seconds, then refolded it, put it back, replaced the floorboard, not touched it again. because there are things you carry and things you put down, and the difference between wisdom and denial is knowing which is which, and she had not been entirely sure which category this fell into. She picked it up now, unfolded it. It was not a letter. She'd thought, when she first found it tucked into her bag during the confusion after the news from Laramie, appeared somehow between Cheyenne and the first nameless town, she'd thought it was a letter. Final words, explanations, the kind of thing a man writes when he knows something is coming. It wasn't. It was a wanted poster. Not the printed kind, the official territorial ones with blocky typography and rough woodcut portraits that never looked like anyone. This was handwritten. Done carefully, in 2 different inks, which meant it had been updated after the original. Good quality paper, not the rough newsprint of government offices. At the top, a name. Aldous Harmon Dorn. Below it, charges. Murder in the first-degree 1 count. Abilene, Kansas. September 1871. Fraud. Extortion. The language precise and formal in a way that suggested whoever wrote it had some familiarity with legal documents. Below the charges, a description. Age at time of writing, approximately 40. Silver-haired even then. Distinguished. Presents as a man of business. Fluent in legal language. Should be considered dangerous regardless of demeanor. At the bottom, 2 signatures. The first, in heavier ink, the original U.S. Marshal G.T. Voss, Wyoming Territory, November 1871. The second, in different ink, added later. A note rather than a signature, written in handwriting she knew. The way, she knew the sound of certain winds. Voss is in Harlan's Crossing. Find him first. She stared at that line for a long time. Find him first. Her father had known. He had known she would come here, or hoped she would, or somehow arranged that she would, or simply trusted that the thing he'd put in her would eventually bring her to the right place. He had known about Voss, had tucked this piece of paper into her life like a note slid under a door, and then he had died, or said he died, or been reported to have died, which was not, she was realizing, quite the same thing. She folded the paper, put it in her pocket, stood up, stood in the middle of the room for a moment, holding the Colt at her side, and thought, find him first. All right, then. Gideon Voss had a shoe repair shop at the east end of the main street, between the general store and the former barber shop that was now Dorn's office. She hadn't known his name before the poster, but she'd noticed him. She noticed everyone. It was the kind of habit that once started doesn't stop, and Voss was the sort of man who, if you were in the habit of noticing, you noticed. 63 years old, or somewhere near it. Built like a man who had once been broader across the shoulders and had shrunk slightly inward over the years. White hair kept short, a beard more white than gray. Moved with the deliberateness of someone who had had bad knees for a long time and made peace with the pace that required. He sat in the front window of his shop most days, repairing things. He'd been there when she first arrived in Harlan's Crossing 5 years ago, and had been there every day since she'd passed the window. She'd said good morning to him 3 or 4 times. He'd said it back. That was the extent of their acquaintance. She pushed open the door at 7:45. The smell hit first. Leather, neatsfoot oil, the drywood smell of a workspace that stays warm because the person using it spends a lot of time there. Small iron stove in the corner banked low, shelves of boots and shoes in various states of disassembly. A workbench running the length of the left wall, lit by 2 oil lamps positioned with care. Voss was at the bench. A woman's boot in a last, a half-sole, tacked on and waiting to be stitched. He was threading a curved needle when she came in, and looked up with the expression of a man interrupted in a task requiring focus, mildly annoyed, professionally neutral. Then he saw what she was carrying at her side. The expression changed. Not much, not dramatically. Just changed. Shop's not quite open, he said. I'm not here about shoes, Wren said. She crossed the room and set the wanted poster on the workbench in front of him. He looked at it. Didn't move. Didn't pick it up. Just looked at it, the way you look at something you recognize and would rather not have recognized. After a moment he set down the curved needle, carefully, precisely, in the exact groove of the workbench where it had come from, as though that mattered. Then he looked up at her. Not her face first. He looked at her the way a man looks when he's trying to understand something started at the top, worked down, taking inventory. The height, the red hair in a braid over one shoulder, the gray eyes, the Colt at her side. He came back to the eyes, stared at them for a long moment. "Lord have mercy," he said. His voice had gone quiet. "You've got his eyes and his temper, I reckon. You knew my father." "Knew him," he said the word like it had a complicated flavor. "Yes, I knew Cole Rourke." He said the name, the way you say a name that opens a door you've kept shut for a long time, like you can feel the weight of it before you turn the handle. "Tell me about 1871, Wren said. Voss looked at the poster, looked at the window. Street still quiet too early for most of the town, though the general store had lights on. "Sit down," Voss said. "I'll stand." He considered this. Nodded once, the nod of a man deciding that arguing about where a person stands is a lower priority than what needs to be said. "Abilene," he said. "September of 71. I was serving as marshal for the Wyoming Territory, at the time based out of Cheyenne, had jurisdiction across about 6 counties. Dorn wasn't calling himself a railroad man back then. He was running a land speculation operation, bought distressed properties, fraudulent paperwork, the usual. And he killed a man. He said it flat, without drama. Man named Prentice. Samuel Prentice, homesteader, had 160 acres south of Abilene that Dorn wanted, and Prentice wouldn't sell. Prentice ended up dead in what Dorn called a dispute. I called it murder. Had witnesses. Had the weapon. Had Dorn in irons and transported to a territorial court inside of 3 weeks. He stopped. "Hand," Wren said. And he walked. The word dropped like something heavy onto a stone floor. Judge by the name of Cornelius Farr presided. Federal appointment, 8 years on the bench. Good reputation, or what I thought was a good reputation. Dorn walked on a technicality that was, to my professional understanding, not a technicality at all. It was a fabrication. Farr dismissed 2 of my key witnesses on evidentiary grounds that any practicing attorney would tell you were invented. He looked at his hands. The knuckles on his right enlarged old breaks healed crooked. Dorn walked out of that courthouse the same afternoon. And you lost my position 6 weeks later. Simply. No self-pity. Just the fact. Insufficient diligence in evidence handling. That's what the report said. 16 years ago. I was 47. He looked up. I came here because it was far enough. You knew Dorn would come back. Men like Dorn always. He stopped, reconsidered. Honestly? No, I told myself I didn't care anymore, that I was done with it. He glanced at the poster. That's not my writing. The second note. No, your father's. Yes. Silence. The stove ticked as the metal expanded. Outside the street sounds were beginning the general store door, a wagon from somewhere west. How long has Dorn been here? Voss said. 14 months. How much of the county? Close to 70% of the land around the town. Buying and taking and threatening. The Beaumont house burned 4 nights ago. Something moved across Voss's face. Not surprise. Recognition. Same pattern, he said. Same as Abilene. Same as 3 other towns I heard about after I came here, didn't want to hear about them, but word travels. He looked at his hands again. He's been doing this for 16 years. Different territories. Different names for the operation. Same result. He's doing it for the railroad, Wren said. That's what he says. Voss looked at her. You believe that? She thought about it. No, she said. Good. Because I've been sitting in this window for 6 months, watching his riders come and go, and railroad operations don't run the way his does. Railroad men want land for right-of-way. They want specific parcels in specific configurations. Dorn's been taking everything he can reach, in every direction. That's not right-of-way acquisition. That's something else. What? He shook his head slightly. I don't know yet, but I've been watching and thinking. He looked at the poster again, then at her. Why are you in Harlan's Crossing? I live here. For 5 years, yes. And you didn't know Dorn was here when you arrived? She paused. I didn't know his name, she said, which was true. She'd been moving from place to place, far enough from what she'd left that it felt like starting over. She'd come to Harlan's Crossing because she'd passed through on a freighter's wagon in the summer of 1882, and the town had seemed quiet, manageable. A place where a woman with skills and limited requirements could build something modest and lasting. She hadn't known his name. But she wondered now, as she had wondered in the dark last night, looking at the ceiling, whether some part of her had been drawn here. Whether the thing her father had put in her had brought her to the one place where the thing he'd been after for years was finally consolidating. Find him first. Maybe she already had. Just hadn't opened the box yet. Outside your window, Wren said. What? She nodded toward the front glass. Voss turned. On the street, one of Dorn's riders was passing at a walk. Not the three from this morning, a different one. Older, on a bay horse. Moving slowly. Coming from the direction of the barber shop-turned-office. Voss watched him pass. By morning, he said quietly, almost to himself. What? He turned back. His face had settled into something that was not quite the expression of a man who repairs shoes. By morning, Dorn will know Cole Rourke's daughter is in Harlan's Crossing, he said, and that'll scare him worse than anything has scared him in 16 years. Why? He looked at her for a moment. Because Dorn thinks he killed your father, he said. A beat. And men who think they've buried something. He picked up the curved needle again, turned it once between his fingers. They panic when it starts moving. She walked home without hurrying. That was important. The way you move when things are changing tells everyone watching you how to feel about the change. Move fast and you signal that the situation requires speed. Signal that, and you've told whoever's watching they should be concerned. Concerned people make noise. Noise draws attention. And attention was the last thing she wanted when she was carrying a Colt under her shawl and a wanted poster in her pocket and 16 years of someone else's deferred reckoning in her chest. She walked home, nodded to Mrs. Aldridge outside the general store, stopped at the post office to collect a pattern from a catalog, a wedding dress commission from Rollins, ordered 3 weeks ago, went home, put the Colt and the poster on the table, made fresh coffee, sat down, thought. The thing about Cole Rourke, the thing she'd spent 9 years trying to understand in the time she had left over after the grief and the getting on with it, was that he'd been two different things at once, and they'd never fully resolved. He'd been a father, a real one, not a perfect one, present, interested. He'd taught her to ride before she could walk steadily, taught her to track in snow, to read weather moving through high country, to start a fire with wet wood. Taught her to shoot methodically, carefully, attention to each element, stance, breath, sight alignment, trigger press, the particular patience required to be still at the moment of decision. He'd made her learn with the left hand as well as the right. Because, he'd said, you don't always get to choose the conditions. And he'd been the other thing. The thing that had an assigned weight in the history of the Wyoming Territory. A history she'd only ever understood in fragments, overheard and secondhand, through the careful silences her father kept around certain subjects. Cole Drifting Rourke. She knew the name meant something to certain people. She'd seen it on the faces of men who'd been introduced to him, not all men, not common men, but the ones who'd been in particular places during particular years. A particular kind of recognition. The kind you get when a name you've heard associated with specific events suddenly has a body attached to it. She had never asked him directly. He had never told her directly. That had been, she recognized now with the clarity of distance, a kind of agreement they'd both kept without discussing. He'd taught her everything that mattered. He'd never explained what he'd done with everything he knew. And then he'd died, or said he had. And she was still sitting at this table with coffee going cold. For the second time this morning, she was still not entirely sure she could hold this thought without it moving somewhere she wasn't ready for. Men who think they've buried something panic when it starts moving. The rider on the bay horse. By morning, she drank the cold coffee, looked at the Colt on the table, thought about the second note at the bottom of the poster. The handwriting she knew. The instruction that assumed she'd eventually be here, in this situation, needing this specific piece of information. Voss is in Harlan's Crossing. Find him first. Not. There's a wanted poster. Do something about it. Not even. Be careful. Just find Voss. First. Before what? Before whoever came second. She went to see the Beaumonts that night. Clara Hinshaw's house was on the north end of the main street, larger than most in Harlan's Crossing. Clara, being a woman of modest prosperity and considerable hospitality, who'd taken in the Beaumonts without discussion the night of the fire and installed them in the 2 spare rooms with the thoroughness of someone who intended the arrangement to last as long as necessary. George Beaumont was in Clara's front room when Wren arrived. Della already in bed, shoulder bad. The doctor from Rawlins had come yesterday. 2 weeks minimum before she could use it properly. The George had a cup of tea he wasn't drinking. He was a big man, or had been, 63, and you could see what he'd been in the set of his shoulders and the size of his hands. The 2-fingered right hand resting on his knee, but something had gone out of him, not broken, not finished, just banked, like a fire that's been pushed back. Wren sat across from him. "You were at the fire," he said. "Yes, you didn't leave." No, he was quiet a moment. "Most of them left by 11, he said. "Couldn't blame them. Cold night. Nothing they could do. Della wanted me to leave too, but He stopped. "I kept thinking there might be something left to get out." "The strong box," Wren said. He looked at her. "How'd you know about?" "I listened." Pause. 15 years of papers," he said. "Deeds, correspondence, records. The original homestead claim certificate." He looked at his tea. "Dorn's going to tell the county office there's no proof we ever held that land. Does anyone else have copies? The land office in Rawlins would have the original filing, but the land agent there is a man named Pell, and Pell's been—" He stopped. "In Dorn's pocket," Wren finished. George looked at her, studies her with those pale blue eyes, the kind that comes with age in certain men, not faded, just clarified, stripped down to something essential. "Miss Rourke," he said, "what are you planning?" "I don't know yet," she said, which was true. She was still gathering, still letting the pieces arrange themselves. Acting before you understood was how people got themselves and others killed. You gathered first, understood first, when you knew where you were going. "I need to know something," she said. "Before Dorn came here, was there anything unusual about your property?" George frowned. "Unusual how?" "Geological. Any prospectors passing through? Anyone asking questions about the land east of the creek bed?" George was quiet. Something shifted in his face. "3 years ago," he said slowly, "there was a man. Said he was a surveyor. Something about drainage assessment, irrigation potential. Spent 2 days walking the east parcel. Did he come back? Once, 3 months later. Didn't stop at the house. I saw him from the upper field, east side, near the creek bank. He was with another man, both carrying equipment. I didn't get close enough to see what kind. Thought it was irrigation, like he'd said." Wren sat with that for a moment. "You didn't tell Dorn's men about this? When they first started making offers?" "No. Didn't see why it would matter." "All right," Wren said. She stood. "Miss Rourke." George's voice stopped her at the door. She turned. Those stripped-down eyes. "Is there something under that land?" She looked at him for a moment. "I think," she said, "that's what we need to find out." She went to Voss the following morning. He was at his bench. She'd stopped being surprised by this, had the impression he was there most of the day, and she suspected he stayed close to the bench the same way she stayed close to her porch, not because he lacked options, but because he understood the value of a fixed vantage point. She told him about the surveyor, the visits to the east parcel, the equipment. Voss listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "What's in the Sierra Madre?" he asked, not as a question he didn't know the answer to, as a question he was thinking through out loud. "Copper," Wren said. "There's been activity since the early part of the decade. Doane and Rambler have a mine up near encampment. There's been prospecting in the district since '81. Voss looked at her. "Where'd you learn that?" "I read," she almost smiled. "Very small. But there. And you think Dorn?" "I think the Union Pacific Survey corridor runs north to south through Carbon County," she said. "I think the Beaumont property is 3 miles east of that corridor. I think Dorn has been taking land in every direction. not just the right-of-way parcels. And I think the reason is something underneath the land that isn't on any survey yet and that Dorn wants controlled before anyone else knows it's there. Voss turned the curved needle between his fingers. If he's doing what you're describing, he said slowly, he's not working for the railroad. He's working against it, using their name and their paperwork to accumulate assets he intends to what? Sell to a mining concern? Keep for himself? Either. Both. He's had 16 years to figure out how to do this in a way that gives him time to set the assets before anyone catches up, and a federal judge who owes him, or is afraid of him. Voss was quiet. There's a man, he said, not looking at her. Goes by the name Quanah Ridgway. You may have seen him, mixed blood, Comanche and Anglo, runs a trap line up in the Sierra Madre, does some hunting for the area ranches. He knows that mountain range better than anyone I've encountered. He's been in and out of Harlan's Crossing for years. I've seen him, Wren said. She had. A man of about 40 faces in the high country aged differently. Tall, broad through the shoulders, dark hair worn loose. She'd seen him two or three times bringing game into town. He walked with the ease of someone who knows exactly how to distribute weight across any kind of ground. She'd noticed him because he noticed things. Most people didn't. They saw, in the superficial way the eyes work, but they didn't observe. He observed. She'd caught him watching the riders outside the saloon, the way she watched them. Not with alarm, not with disinterest, but with attention. He knows something, Voss said. He's been watching Dorn's operation. The way you can tell when someone's tracking something, they keep returning to it. He comes back to this town more often than the trap line or hunting contracts require. You think he'd talk to me? I think, Voss said carefully, that he already knows who you are. And I think that's probably why. Wren looked at him. He knew my father? I don't know what he knew. I know he's been here longer than Dorn, and watching longer than you have, and whatever he knows, he's been keeping it, the way men keep things when they're not sure who to trust with it. He set down the needle. Men like your father had a particular radius. People orbited them. People owed them things or felt they did. I saw it more than once. Your father had that quality. Wren said nothing. Find Ridgway, Voss said. He comes in on Wednesdays. Sells pelts to the general store. It was Tuesday. All right, Wren said. She stood. He went back to his needle. She was at the door when he spoke again. Miss Rourke. She turned. He was threading the needle, not looking at her the way men speak when they want to say something and have decided to look busy while they say it. Cole Rourke was the most deliberate man I ever met. He didn't do things by accident. Not the teaching of you. Not the leaving of that paper. Not he cut himself off. The radius. It doesn't disappear just because the center of it does. She held that. Good morning, Voss, she said. Good morning. Miss Rourke, he said, and kept threading his needle. The fourth morning she was on the porch again. Sun came over the eastern ridge sudden, like a lamp turned on in the next room. The cooper's rooster called 3 times and went quiet. The livery sign creaked. The saloon door groaned at 6:15. She sat with the yoke across her lap, a different one this time, belonging to old Harlow Deeds, who ran a freight operation 2 miles out, and her coffee going cold beside her, and the colt under the shawl folded over her shoulders, watching the south road. At 7:10, she heard horses. 3 sets of hooves, same rhythm as before. She kept stitching. The 3 riders stopped 12 feet from the porch steps. Miss Rourke, the middleman, knew approach her name, trying formality. I think we've gone past pleasantries at this point. Have we? She said. Mr. Dorn has asked me to communicate that he considers this matter urgent. He's prepared to make a final offer, a fair price, cash payment, processed within the week. Tell me something, Wren said. She stopped stitching, looked up, morning light in her eyes from the east, and she squinted slightly, which made her look. She was aware, either thoughtful or dangerous, and was content to let it be ambiguous. The Beaumont property, she said. 160 acres, bottomland east of the creek. What's Mr. Dorn planning to do with it? The man in the middle looked at her, trying to figure out if the question was a negotiating tactic or something else. That's not. Humor me. He glanced at the man on his left, back to her. Railroad right-of-way, he said. As documented, right-of-way goes north to south through Carbon County. Wren said the Union Pacific Survey from 1885 is public record. The Beaumont Bottomland is 3 miles east of the proposed corridor. It's not right-of-way. What's it for? The man in the middle went very still. Small thing. She almost missed it. But she'd spent her whole life in the habit of watching. And what she saw was a man who'd been asked a question he either didn't know the answer to or very much didn't want to answer and couldn't immediately decide which response was safer. That pause told her something. It told her that even Dorn's own men didn't fully know what this was about. The offer stands until Friday, the man said, recovered now, back in his professional register. After Friday, Mr. Dorn will be taking a different approach. I look forward to it, Wren said. She looked back down at the yoke. She heard the horses turn, heard them ride away, sat very still. For a moment the needle stopped mid-pull, 3 miles east of the proposed corridor, taking everything he can reach in every direction. Something else. She finished the stitch, set down the yoke, stood up and looked out over the main street of Harlan's Crossing, the general store, the saloon, the cracked bell church, the livery, the cold forge, the row of beaten-up houses going west. 300 people in a town being taken apart from the edges inward. She went inside. She found Quanah Ridgway on Wednesday morning. Not at the general store. She didn't wait for him to come to her. She'd asked around the previous afternoon, carefully, without explaining why, and learned he made camp on Wednesdays in a spot 3 miles north of town on the creek road, where the cottonwoods came close to the water and the bank was flat enough to set a tent. Same spot, for years. She rode Dunbar her horse, a dun quarter horse mare she'd bought for $40 in Laramie City and had been in continuous negotiation with ever since about whether Dunbar was interested in being ridden today or not. This morning Dunbar was cooperative. Wren took it as either a good omen or evidence that even Dunbar understood something was shifting. She found the camp without difficulty. Ridgway was there, skinning a rabbit over a small fire, the motions efficient and completely unhurried. He didn't look up when she rode in. I wondered when, he said. She dismounted. Let Dunbar drink from the creek. When what? She said. When you'd stop waiting for me to come to town. He worked the skin away from the back legs. Sit down. She sat on the opposite side of the fire. In daylight, close up, she could read him better than from street-level observations. 40, she revised, maybe a little older. The face weathered in a specific way, years of altitude, wind, exposure. But the eyes were sharp, not the sharp of aggression, the sharp of someone who has paid attention to the world for a long time and found the payment worthwhile. You knew my father, she said, not a question. Cole Rourke saved my younger brother's life in 1876, Ridgway said, coming through the mountains above Laramie in November. My brother had gone over his horse bad fall, left leg broken in 2 places, couldn't move. Snow coming in. He paused. Your father came off the pass road and spent 3 days in a blizzard keeping my brother from dying. Carried him out on the 3rd day when the snow broke. He looked at her across the fire. I was looking for my brother when I found them, coming down from the north side. When I arrived, your father was sitting outside the shelter in the wind keeping watch. He was quiet a moment. I asked him why he hadn't just left. Continued on. Let someone else find him. What did he say? He said, because I happened to be the one who was there. Ridgway looked back at the rabbit. It's a particular kind of man who answers that way. Wren was quiet. He told you about me, she said. He said he had a daughter, red hair, gray eyes, tall. He said she was the most capable person he'd ever taught, and that he'd spent her whole childhood hoping she'd never need to use what he'd taught her. The fire cracked. Wind in the cottonwoods. I've been watching Dorn's operation, Ridgway said. For 4 months, since I noticed his men going into the Sierra Madre on the east face, into the drainage above what used to be Beaumont's east parcel. Not prospectors, not surveyors, men with tools, moving rock. What did they find? I found what they found before they did. Or near enough. He looked at her copper. a significant vein running northeast from the Sierra Madre drainage toward the creek basin. It surfaces at 2 points on the east side of what was Beaumont's property. Follow it west back into the mountains, it widens considerably. He set down the rabbit. Large deposit. Not the largest in the territory. The Doan Rambler claim up near encampment is more established, but large. And under land, that is, as of last month, almost entirely under Dorn's control. Wren absorbed this. The railroad is the cover, she said. The railroad knows nothing about it, or not the extent of it. Dorn has been using their documentation and their name to move fast, before any independent survey reaches the area. When he has title to enough of the surface land, he'll have grounds to claim rights to what's under it. He'll sell to a mining concern or operate it himself. Either way, he makes a fortune. The railroad gets nothing, Wren said. Nothing. She looked at the fire. How long before the federal survey team comes through? 9 days, maybe 10. They're working down from the north. When they arrive and run the geological assessment, if Dorn has clear title to the surface land fabricated or not, he has grounds to delay the federal claim process for months, long enough to extract what he needs. So we have 9 days to. Less, Ridgway said. He looked at her steadily. There's something else. There is a federal judge. Name of Cornelius Farr. He presided over Dorn's acquittal in 1871. The original case your father's man Voss built. Farr was appointed to a new district 3 years ago. He has jurisdiction over Carbon County. Landis's the only federal judge in the territory, with full authority to certify title claims at the level Dorn needs. I believe Dorn has Farr. What do you mean, has him? I mean, Ridgway said precisely, that I have observed a man matching Farr's description brought to Dorn's main ranch property under circumstances that did not appear voluntary. 6 days ago. Wren went still. He's being held. I believe so. To sign the title certifications. When Dorn has everything ready. Which means Dorn isn't waiting 9 days, she said. No, I don't think he is. She looked up. Why are you telling me this now? You've known for months. Why? Because a month ago, Ridgway said quietly, I started seeing sign in the hills west of Dorn's ranch. Someone moving at night. Careful. Experienced. Whoever it is, they've been watching Dorn's operation for longer than I have, and from closer. He held her gaze. They shoot left-handed. I found the position they used 2 nights ago. From the mark the barrel made on the rock and the angle. He paused. A left-handed marksman, with the patience to watch and not yet act. Waiting for something. The morning light through the cottonwoods. The creek sound. Wren sat very still. Cole Rourke. Left-handed. He'd made her learn both hands. Because you don't always get to choose the conditions. But he was left-handed, had always been, and the left-handed shot was his shot. The one that came from muscle memory laid down so deep it came before thought. She made herself breathe. You think it's him, she said. Not quite a question. I don't know who it is, Ridgway said. I'm telling you what I observed. A pause. But I'll say this. Whoever is out there, they've been positioned between Dorn's ranch and where Dorn would go if he ran. They're not watching. They're waiting to intercept. She sat with that for a moment. Can you take me to where you found the position? Yes. He stood in the easy, unfolding way of a man with good joints and a lot of practice. But not today. Today you need to talk to Voss. Tell him what I've told you. Because if Farr is being held and Dorn is moving faster than 9 days, we need to move faster than Dorn. Wren said yes. She stood, looked at him across the dead fire. Why does this matter to you? She said. You've been watching for months. You could have gone to the territorial authorities. The territorial authorities are in Cheyenne, Ridgway said. And your father once sat in a blizzard for 3 days, keeping my brother alive, because he happened to be the one who was there. He held her gaze. I happen to be the one who is here. She rode back to Harlan's Crossing, tied Dunbar at the livery, walked the length of the main street in the Wednesday morning activity, the general store busy, a wagon unloading lumber outside the hardware, 3 children running past the church in a direction that suggested they were supposed to be in school and had opinions about that. She walked like someone going to the dry goods store. She was thinking about a left-handed man in the hills west of Dorn's ranch. She was thinking about 9 years. She was thinking about all the things she'd built in those 9 years. The porch, the sewing work, the quiet life carefully assembled in the space, left by a grief she'd lived with so long it had become load-bearing, part of the structure, something she'd built on top of, instead of dismantling, and what it would mean to discover that the grief had been wrong. Not wrong like a mistake, wrong like a lie, not a cruel lie. She could hear Voss's voice, the most deliberate man I ever met. Not cruel, deliberate, everything for a reason. But 9 years was 9 years. And she wasn't sure, standing in the middle of the main street of Harlan's Crossing, with the morning sun on the Carbon County high country, and the wind coming down off the Sierra Madre, that relentless high country wind that moved through everything and cared about nothing. She wasn't sure whether understanding a reason made the thing itself easier to carry. She would find out, but first, she turned, walked toward Voss's shop, walked past 3 of Dorn's men standing outside the saloon, past them, without looking, without slowing, the pace of who sees you and does not find you relevant, which is more unnerving to most men than being stared at. She pushed open the door. Voss looked up and saw her face. "What happened?" he said. She told him all of it. The surveyor, the copper, the position in the hills, the left-handed shooter in the dark. Voss sat through all of it without moving. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he looked out the front window at the street. One of Dorn's men visible at the far end of the block. "By morning," he said quietly, "Dorn is going to know something has changed. I've been sitting in this window a long time. He's had men watching me too. If his riders saw you come in here twice, if they saw you come in from the North Road—" "I know," Wren said. "We're running out of time to watch." "I know." Voss turned from the window, looked at her with those old clear eyes. "Miss Rourke, what are you going to do?" Wren Rourke stood in the middle of a shoe shop in Harlan's Crossing, Carbon County, Wyoming Territory, in the autumn of 1887, with a Colt under her shawl and a wanted poster in her pocket, and something moving in the hills to the west that she wasn't ready to name yet. "What my father taught me," she said. She turned and walked out the door. The morning light hit her straight on. She walked back toward her porch. She didn't hurry. The night after she walked out of Voss's shop, Wren didn't sleep. Not the restless kind of not sleeping, where you turn over and try different positions and negotiate with the dark. The awake kind. Fully, deliberately awake, sitting at the table in the back room, with the lamp turned low and the Colt on the wood in front of her, and her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had been cold for an hour, thinking. Not about Dorn. About the hills west of the ranch. About a left-handed shooter who hadn't fired. About the difference between waiting and choosing not to act yet, because those were 2 different things, and she'd been taught to recognize the difference. And what Ridgway had described in those hills was not a man waiting. It was a man positioned, ready, choosing every night to hold. For what? For her? The thought arrived. She pushed it away. It came back. She let it sit this time. If it was her father, and she was absolutely not going to land on that yet, not until she had something more than a left-handed firing position, and 9 years of refusing to fully believe the report from Laramie. But if it was him, then he had been watching Dorn for some amount of time, long enough to know the layout of the ranch, long enough to find the position, and he had not acted, which meant he was waiting for something, or someone. She looked at the Colt. Not, "Go find him now." Not, "Go to the hills." First, as in, before you do the next thing, do this thing. Find Voss, which she had, and Voss had given her Ridgway, and Ridgway had given her the hills. And the hills, she picked up the Colt, turned it in her hands the way she'd been turning it since she was old enough to hold it without her wrist giving out. The weight, the particular balance of 4 3/4 inches of barrel, the worn walnut grip. She'd shot with it enough that her hand knew the shape before her eyes did, the way you know a familiar doorknob in the dark. She set it down, picked up the coffee, drank the cold dregs. Tomorrow she'd find a way into the hills. Tonight she'd sit here and be honest with herself about what she was carrying. Because that was the other thing he'd taught her. The harder thing. The thing most people skipped because it was uncomfortable. You couldn't move well if you were carrying weight you hadn't accounted for. You had to know what was in you before you went into something that required everything you had. So, what was in her? There was the practical Dorn, Far, the copper, the 9 days that were now 8, the pieces that needed to be moved in the right order. And there was the other thing, the thing underneath the practical. 9 years of grief that might have been a lie. Not a cruel lie. She kept coming back to that. Not cruel. That distinction was important. It made a difference. She believed it made a difference. But the result was the same, regardless of the intention. She had been 17 years old, and she had received a report, and she had spent the following months in a kind of internal freefall. She had never described to anyone, and would not now, and she had come out the other side rebuilt differently, assembled, the seams showing, if you knew where to look, but standing. She had built a life. A real one. Small. Quiet, hers. And now, she breathed out. If it was really him out there in the dark above Dorn's ranch, left-handed patient, waiting for something she might be the something for, what did she do with 9 years? She didn't know. She knew she'd figure it out. But she didn't know yet. She turned down the lamp. Sat in the dark. Let it be complicated for a few hours. Because some things deserve the respect of being complicated before you make yourself get on with it. Ford Callum came at first light. She heard his footstep on the porch before he knocked. Knew it wasn't the rider's because it was one set of feet, hesitant and young. She opened the door. Before he got his knuckles up, he blinked. "Come in," she said. He came in. Hat off. Stood in the middle of her front room, looking at the space, the way young men look at spaces they've never been in and aren't sure what the rules are. "Sit down," she said. He sat at the table. She got him coffee without asking. He had the hollowed look of someone who also hadn't slept. "Tell me about the documents," she said. He wrapped both hands around the cup. "My father has a locked drawer in his desk," he said. "Office desk. At the house he doesn't use the sheriff's office much anymore, does most of his paperwork at home. I've seen him put things in it at night, after he thinks I'm asleep." He paused. "I went through it 3 weeks ago, when he was in Rawlins." She looked at him. "I know how to pick a lock," he said, slightly defensive. "My mother taught me. She said a woman living with a lawman needed to know how to get into things he didn't want her in." Something crossed Wren's face that wasn't quite a smile but was in the neighborhood. "What was in the drawer?" she said. 11 documents. All land office paperwork, transfer records, title certifications, 2 survey reports, all dated within the last 8 months. He set down the cup. All of them had been through the county land office in Rawlins. All of them had been filed. But none of them were in the public record that I could find. I checked the public register at the Rawlins office last time I was there, and these parcels aren't listed. "Filed but not registered," Wren said. "Which means they exist as legal documents but nobody knows about them. Until Dorn needs them to exist. At which point they surface dated months ago, fully processed, completely legitimate on paper." Ford nodded. "There's something else." He reached into his jacket, brought out a folded piece of paper, a copy, in his own handwriting. Careful, deliberate work. He'd taken his time. "I copied the parcel descriptions," he said, "and the names on the title transfers." She took it, unfolded it. "Read down the list. 11 parcels. 7 she recognized as properties where families had sold under pressure in the last year. The other 4 she read the descriptions again. East side of the creek basin. The drainage above the Sierra Madre approach, the high ground east of the old Beaumont property, the copper-bearing land, all of it, already documented, already in the drawer, already waiting. "Your father knows what's in these documents," she said. "Yes." Ford's voice flat on it. Not without feeling flat the way you go flat when feeling something would take energy you need for something else. "Has he said anything to you about Dorn? About what he's doing?" "He says Dorn is a legitimate businessman. Says the railroad is good for Carbon County. Says the families who sold got fair value." He looked at the table. "He says a lot of things. Do you believe him?" Silence. "No," Ford said. "I haven't believed him for about 6 months." She folded the paper, put it in her pocket beside the wanted poster. "Ford," she said, "I need you to understand something. What I'm planning, if it goes forward, your father is going to be implicated. Not because I'm trying to hurt your family. Because those documents exist and they're in his drawer and he put them there." Ford looked up. "I know," he said. "And you're all right with that." Long pause. "He made his choices," Ford said. "I get to make mine." She told Voss about the documents that morning. He listened with his hands flat on the workbench. When she finished, he was still for a moment, then nodded once the nod of a man whose understanding of a situation has just been confirmed and who finds no satisfaction in being right. "We need to move on the office," he said. "I know. The documents in Callum's drawer aren't the ones that matter most. The certifications themselves, the originals that were filed but not registered, those are in Dorn's office, or at the ranch." "The office," Wren said. "The ranch is too exposed. He keeps the working paperwork close." "Former barber shop," Voss said. "Yes. He was quiet. That building has 2 men in it during the day and 1 at night," he said. "Side window faces the alley behind the hardware. The back door opens onto the alley." She looked at him. "You've been watching it." "I've been sitting in this window for 6 months," he said. "A man runs out of things to look at eventually and starts paying attention." She very nearly smiled at that. "Tonight?" she said. "Tonight," he said, "she went to find Ridgway." He was where she expected, not at the Creek Road camp, which was Wednesdays only, but at a rocky outcrop north of the main street where the ridge curved and gave a clean view of the town and the roads coming in. She'd been up there herself twice in the early months when she was still mapping the place. He was there, sitting against the rock eating jerked meat and watching the south road. "I need tonight," she said. "I know," he said. "Boss says the office has 1 man after dark. Side window, back door." 2 men, Ridgway said. "He added a second 3 days ago. After you talked to Voss the first time." He didn't look at her when he said it, just kept his eyes on the south road. "The second one comes around midnight. Sits in the back room." She absorbed this. "Can you manage the second one?" "Yes." Without killing anyone," he said. "Yes. I've managed harder things quietly." She sat down beside him. They looked out over the town together for a moment. The small, crooked shape of it from up here, the church bell tower, the saloon roof, the livery, the line of houses going west, smoke from the general store's stovepipe, 3 of Dorn's horses tied outside the saloon. "There's something I need to ask you," she said. "The shooter in the hills," Ridgway said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I told you what I observed," he said. "Left-handed. Patient. Positioned at least 4 nights. I haven't approached. Why not? Because a man that careful in that position doesn't want to be approached, and I have enough respect for that kind of careful to honor it. After tonight," she said, "if we get what we need from the office, I want to go to the hills, I know. Will you take me?" He looked at her then. Steady. "Yes," he said. They went at midnight. 3 of them, Wren, Voss, Ridgway. Ford had wanted to come. She'd told him no. Not because she didn't trust him. Because if this went wrong and a sheriff's son was caught breaking into an office his father's employer was using as a staging ground for fraud, the consequences were different from the consequences for a former marshal, a trapper, and a seamstress. "Stay home," she'd told him. "Be visible tomorrow morning. Eat breakfast at the saloon. Talk to people." He hadn't liked it. He'd agreed. The alley behind the hardware was dark in the way. Alleys get dark in small towns, not the managed dark of someone who's thought about visibility, but the accidental dark of a place where nobody put a lamp because nobody thought to. The back wall of Dorn's office had 1 window, boarded from the inside, and the door solid plank, original barbershop construction, with a padlock hasp that Voss took about 40 seconds to work with a pick he'd produced from his boot. He'd said, once been very good at his job. She believed him. The padlock came open. Door swung in. She went first low, the Colt in her right hand, back room storage, 2 chairs, a cold stove, the faint smell of tobacco and something chemical. The first guard was in the front room. She could hear him. Chair creak. The slow rhythm of a man fighting sleep at midnight on a job he's bored by. She moved through the back room to the connecting door. put her back against the wall beside it, listened. One set of breathing, one chair, no second guard yet. She held up 2 fingers to Voss, then one, pointed at herself, pointed through the door. He nodded. She went through. The guard was mid-40s, heavy-set, tilted back in the chair, with his boots up on the desk, and his hat over his face, technically not sleeping, but definitely not watching. She got across the room before he registered anything, got the barrel of the Colt against the side of his neck, before the boots came off the desk. "Don't," she said. "Quiet, absolute." He didn't. Hands on the desk. Both of them. He put his hands on the desk. Voss came through the door behind her. "Where does he keep the filing documents?" she said. "Land office paperwork. Transfer records." The guard looked at the desk in front of him. His hands were steady. She gave him that. "I don't know anything about." "The right-hand drawer is locked," Voss said, moving around the desk. "The left-hand cabinet in the corner has a bar across it. The desk itself has." He ran his fingers along the underside and stopped. There it is. A click. A section of the desk's inner panel swung out. "Made to order," Voss said almost to himself. He had it built in. Clever man. Inside, a stack of documents, manila folders. A lot of paper. Voss began going through it. Fast, methodical, the movements of someone who knows what they're looking for and how documents are organized. "The second man comes at midnight," Wren said. The guard looked at the window. "What time is it?" she said. He swallowed. "1:45, he said. "Ridgway," she said, without turning her head. "I have him," came the voice from outside the side window, even and calm, the way Ridgway said most things. She exhaled. "Good. I've got it," Voss said. She heard him take the documents. Papers being folded, put away. She looked at the guard. "I'm going to need you to think very carefully about what your next hour looks like," she said. "You can raise a noise and have a conversation with me in the street that you won't enjoy. Or you can sit in this chair until someone comes to relieve you, at which point we'll both be gone and all you'll need to say is that the night was quiet." The guard looked at her for a long, considering moment. "Night was quiet," he said. "Good man," Voss said. She backed toward the rear door. Voss went first. She kept the Colt up until the door was between her and the guard, then turned and moved through the back room and out into the alley. Night air. Cold. The particular Carbon County cold that came off high ground. Ridgway materialized out of the shadow beside the hardware building. Between them, sitting on the ground with his wrists tied behind him around the building's corner post, was the second guard, 20 years old at most, mouth working like he wanted to say something, but hadn't decided what. Ridgway had put cloth over his mouth, clean, just enough to keep the noise down. "He's fine," Ridgway said. They moved. She didn't look at the documents that night. She knew what was in them, or knew enough. The point wasn't the content. The point was possession. Dorn needed these to move, and now he didn't have them. And come morning he was going to know something had gone wrong. She put them under the floorboard with the box, went to bed. This time she slept. Morning came hard and gray. She was on the porch with her coffee, when she heard it, the particular sound of a man running in boots on packed dirt, which has a specific, desperate cadence distinct from everything else. One of Dorn's men, coming from the direction of the former barber shop, moving toward Dorn's boarding house, not toward her so. He knew. She drank her coffee. The town would go taut now, the way a rope goes taut, not breaking, not yet, but everything pulled to maximum tension. Ford appeared from the direction of the saloon, moving toward her at a pace slightly faster than casual. He'd seen the running man, too. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps. "They know," he said. "Yes," she said. "What do we?" "Slow down. Walk normal. Go back to the saloon and finish your breakfast. Don't look toward the boarding house." He looked at her. "You're very calm," he said. "I'm not calm," she said. "I'm controlled. There's a difference." He went back to the saloon. She finished her coffee. Dorn's response was measured, which was more frightening, honestly, than if he'd panicked. He sent his men through the town, in pairs, not running, not searching visibly, just walking, watching. The way you watch when you want people to know they're being watched. He sent someone to Voss's shop. She saw it from the porch, 2 men going in, a pause of about 10 minutes, 2 men coming out again. Voss standing in his doorway watching them go, hands at his sides, face neutral. He did not look her direction. Good. An hour later, Ford came to her, around the back, through the gap between her house and the Aldridge property, knocked at the back door. She let him in. "My father," he said. The moment she closed the door, his face compressed, like a man trying to hold too much in too small a space. "My father went to Dorn's boarding house this morning. I followed him. He was inside for 40 minutes. She waited. He came out and went back to the house. And he stopped. Tried again. He went through my room. Looking for something. What would he be looking for? I don't know. I didn't have anything there. The copy of the documents I gave you. I gave you the only copy. I didn't keep one." He looked at her. "He was looking for evidence that I'd been involved. Does he think you were?" Ford's jaw worked. "He came and found me at the saloon afterward. He sat down across from me and looked at me for about 30 seconds without saying anything. He paused, and then he said, 'Stay out of things that aren't your business, Ford.' And he got up and left. The room was quiet. 'He knows,' Wren said. 'He knows I know something,' Ford said. 'Or suspects. He's not sure how much.'" She looked at him, 21 years old, sitting in her kitchen with his hands on the table and his father's silence on his face. The particular look of someone discovering that the people you love are capable of things you didn't want to know they were capable of. Not a new discovery for most people, just new for him. And new always felt like its own category. "Ford," she said, "tonight I'm going to the hills. Ridgway is taking me." He looked up. "You think the shooter is?" "I don't know what I think," she said, which was true. She was keeping the thought in a place adjacent to thinking, but not quite there. "But I need to know who it is, and I need to know before Dorn moves on far." "The documents we took," he said, "they slow him down? They make him uncertain, which is different from slow. Uncertain men sometimes wait. Sometimes they speed up because the uncertainty makes them exposed." She paused. "I think Dorn speeds up, so we have less time than we thought." "We have the time we have," she said. "Go home. Be normal. Don't confront your father." He stood. "And if he asks me directly?" he said. "If he asks me if I had something to do with the office?" She looked at him. "Tell him what a son would tell a father," she said. "Figure out which part of that is still true and say that part." He didn't look comforted by this. She didn't think comfort was what the situation required. He left. She found Voss mid-morning. Not at the shop. She went in through the back, through the alley on the east side. He was at his bench. Of course he was. "They sent 2 men, he said, without looking up. Asked if I'd seen anything unusual last night. I said no. They believe you? They believe what I look like," he said. "A 63-year-old man with bad knees who repairs shoes. It's a useful thing to look like." He glanced up. "The documents are safe?" "Under the floor," she said. "But it doesn't matter much. Dorn knows they're gone. Now he knows there are people in town organized enough to take them." Voss set down his tools. "He'll consolidate. Move the remaining paperwork to the ranch. Move far if he hasn't already somewhere less accessible. I know. We have days, not weeks. I know." He looked at her. "The hills tonight," he said. "Yes." "Silence, Miss Rourke," he said. Careful, the way he'd been careful before, starting a sentence and stopping. "If you find what you think you might find up there." "What then?" She looked at the wall behind his bench. A row of lasts, different sizes, lined up by height like a family portrait. "One thing at a time," she said. "That's not an answer." "No," she said. "It's not." He picked up his tools again. "I'll be here," he said. "Tomorrow morning. Whatever happens tonight." She nodded once. Went out the back the way she'd come in. She spent the afternoon doing exactly what she always did. Suing. Not performance. She had a commission due. A pair of trousers for Harlow Deeds, who worked at the freight operation 2 miles out. A straightforward repair to the knee that needed to be done by end of week because Deeds had paid in advance and the work was owed. She sat at the table in the back room, with the trousers and her needle and the afternoon light coming through the west window at the angle best for close work, and she sewed. Her hands did the work. Her mind was in the hills. She'd been thinking about what she'd say. She kept starting sentences in her head and stopping them. "Where have you been?" No, she knew he'd been, more or less. "Why?" She knew why, or Voss had told her why, and it had the ring of a reason even if it didn't have the full ring of truth yet. What were you thinking? Too much anger in that one. She wasn't ready for the anger yet. She needed it to wait until she'd gotten through the first part. She thought about what he looked like now. She had a face in memory, a specific face, specific age, a man in his late 40s with gray beginning at the temples and lines around the eyes from years of outdoor light, and a jaw that was always slightly more set than it needed to be, as though he was perpetually making a decision about something. That face would be older now. 9 years older. 58. She tried to move the memory forward, tried to add time to it. The gray would have spread, the lines deeper. He'd always been lean. The high country life kept weight off, but 9 years of whatever he'd been doing would show differently in a man's body than it showed in a woman's. She threaded the needle again. Thought, I've been practicing this conversation for 9 years, and I still don't know what to say first. Thought, that's probably fine. He never did much of his talking first anyway. Ridgway came to the back of her house at 11. No knock a sound with a piece of gravel against the window frame, a particular pattern she'd agreed to with him the day before. She was already dressed and ready. Had been ready since 9. She went out the back. He handed her a horse's reins, a different horse from Dunbar, dark brown with a muted coat that wouldn't catch moonlight. Smart. She appreciated that. They rode north, no talking. The town dropped away behind them. The creek road, then off it into terrain. Ridgway knew by something closer to instinct than memory the way you navigate places you've been so many times that the route lives in your body, not your head. The Sierra Madre rose to the west. In the dark they were a mass of darker dark. No detail, just the sense of something very large in the periphery. The stars above were enormous in the way stars are enormous altitude and clean air stripping away everything that softens skies at lower elevations. It was cold. She was used to cold. They climbed for about 40 minutes. The terrain got rougher, more tilted, the horses picking their way with the careful exactness of animals that take bad footing seriously. Ridgway stopped. She stopped beside him. He pointed. A notch in the ridge above them. A rock outcrop maybe 200 feet south and east toward where she knew Dorn's ranch sat. That's where I found the firing position, he said, low. She looked up. The outcrop was dark. No fire, no lamp. Is he there now? She said. I don't know. I think so. He's been there 4 nights. She thought about the 40-second rule her father had taught her. Before you move into a position, give yourself 40 seconds of absolute stillness and look at everything. Not scan look. Actually look at each piece of what's in front of you. She gave herself 40 seconds. The rock. The notch in the ridge. The dark against dark. That might be nothing, might be someone sitting in it. The wind coming down, steady, southwest. Enough to carry a sound, but not enough to mask a large one. She dismounted. Handed Ridgway the reins. Stay here, she said. He took the reins without comment. She started up the slope. The climb was about 10 minutes. She moved slowly, carefully, managing her weight, controlling where she put each step, reading the ground in the dark, the way you learn to read it when you've done it enough times that your feet start to have opinions about rocks before your eyes resolve them. The wind came from the southwest. She stayed on the north side of the approach, not because she was trying to hide, but because coming from the direction of the wind rather than against it was simply better practice. And practice did not require a reason to be good practice. She stopped 20 feet below the outcrop, looked up. Someone was there. She couldn't see much, the shape wasn't clear, wasn't obviously human. But there was something in the notch that wasn't rock, and it was breathing. She could hear it, or thought she could, or she was projecting. She took one breath, let it out slow. I know you're there, she said, not loud. The wind carried it upward. Silence. I'm coming up, she said. She started moving again. 5 feet. 10. The outcrop came into shape around her, a shelf of limestone jutting out from the ridge at about chest height. She got a handhold, pulled herself up and sat, right there on the edge of the shelf, looking into the notch behind it. At a man, he was sitting with his back against the rear wall of the notch. legs stretched out, left hand loose on what she recognized even in the dark, by the silhouette and the particular way it sat in a hand as a Colt 1851 Navy. He had something over his shoulders, a blanket or a coat, dark-colored. He was looking at her. She couldn't see his face well. The moonlight was wrong for it. But she didn't need the moonlight. She'd known the shape of him, the shoulder set, the angle of the head, the particular stillness, from across the room when she was 7 years old, from across a field when she was 12, from across distances that shouldn't have been readable and were, because some things got in early and stayed. She looked at him. He looked at her. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The wind moved through the notch. Below, somewhere in the dark ridgeway, and two horses were being very quiet. "Wren," he said. His voice was lower than she remembered, or she'd remembered it wrong. Or 9 years did things to a voice. She breathed. "You let me grieve you," she said, "for 9 years." He looked at her. "I know," he said. 9 years. Yes. She looked at the notch of his shoulder, the gray that was everywhere in his hair now, or what she could see of it. The lines. "You kept me alive," she said. And she meant it the way you mean something you've had time to understand, not as absolution, just as the fact it was. "I know that's what you'll say." "That's what I'll say," he said, "because it's what happened. That wasn't your choice to make." He was quiet. "No," he said. "It wasn't." He didn't follow it with anything. No justification. No elaboration. She watched him not add to it, and felt something shift in her chest that she wasn't going to name right now. "Not here. Not yet. Don't explain it tonight," she said finally. "We don't have time for everything tonight." "All right," he said. "How long have you been up here? In this position?" 4 nights. He shifted, the blanket adjusting around his shoulders. "In Carbon County?" 3 months. "You've been following Dorn." "He's been following the copper vein north from the Sierra Madre," Cole said. "I've been following him." "How long have you known about the copper?" "Since before the first survey team came through the district. I had time, these past few years, to pay attention to things. The copper activity started in '81, in earnest. Dorn's involvement I tracked from '83. I knew the name from Voss, from what Voss told me when he was still marshalling, before they took his position." He looked at her steadily. "I've been building toward something for a long time." "Building toward what?" "This," he said. "Toward having enough to take him down properly. Not just Dorn Farr, the senator, the whole architecture." He paused. "And toward finding the right moment." "You knew I was here," she said. "I knew you were in Carbon County. I didn't know you were in Harlan's Crossing until 6 weeks ago." He looked at her. "I was planning to come to you when it was time, when I had enough. And you didn't think to?" "No," he said. And the way he said it, flat and not defensive, the flat of a man who knows the answer is inadequate and has decided that saying so honestly is better than dressing it up, stopped her. She looked at him. She thought about 17 years old, about the boarding house in Cheyenne and the laundry and the report that came by messenger, about the months after, the specific geography of that grief, the way it had remade her. She thought, "It doesn't matter if he knows. We have work." "How much have you seen of Dorn's operation?" she said. The shift in tone from whatever that first part had been to this, she watched him register it, watched him make the same decision she had. "Work first, the rest after." "Enough," he said. "The ranch layout, the guard rotations, where he keeps Farr." She stopped. "You know where Farr is?" "East side of the main house, ground level, corner room. 1 guard on the door. He's been there 6 days. Is he all right?" "Alive. Frightened. Not harmed beyond the basics of confinement." "How many men total at the ranch?" 12. Sometimes 14 when the shift from town is out. 3 guard stations, front gate, east stable, south fence line." She absorbed this, organized it. "Dorn knows the documents are gone," she said. "He'll move far." "When?" "Soon. Maybe tomorrow night, maybe tonight." Cole shifted. The Colt 1851 Navy moved with his hand, not threatening. Just there, the way a tool is there when you've been holding it a long time. "We go tonight," he said. "Not tonight. Not just us. I have Voss. I have Ridgeway." I have Ford Cullum. His father's compromised. Ford isn't. Cole looked at her. The ex-marshal, he said. Gideon Voss. Yes, something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, something quieter than that. The expression of a man who, in the middle of something terrible, encounters something that makes sense. I didn't know he was here, Cole said. He didn't know about you either. He's a good man. Yes, she said. She looked out over the notch, toward the dark east, where Dorn's ranch sat below the ridge. She couldn't see it from here, but she knew the direction. Tomorrow night, she said. I'll need everything you know about the layout, the guards, the timing. You'll have it, he said. She looked back at him, and she almost left it there. Almost stood up and said tomorrow then and climbed back down the rock and let the night separate them again until morning made everything more practical. But, Pa, she said. The word dropped into the notch like a stone into still water. She hadn't called him that in a long time. Hadn't thought she would. Hadn't thought the word would still know how to get out. He went very still. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said. I want you to know that so we're clear. I know, he said. I'm also not ready for this to be the last conversation, so I'm not going to let it be. He looked at her for a long time. All right, he said. Very quiet. Tomorrow night, she said. Tomorrow night, he said. She climbed back down. She didn't sleep again. This time it wasn't thinking that kept her up. It was the feeling that comes after you've done something you'd been building toward for a long time, and the doing of it was nothing like what you'd practiced. Not bad. Not good. Just different. Realer. The way actual things are different from the version of them you've been carrying in your head. She lay in the dark and breathed and let herself have the feeling without trying to interpret it. He was alive. He had been alive for 9 years. He was 58 years old and gray-haired and sitting in a cold notch in a Carbon County ridgeline with a gun in his left hand because he had been building towards something, and the building had brought him here, and she had climbed up in the dark and said, I'm not ready to forgive you, and he had said, I know, and that had been enough. For now. It was enough for now, she breathed. Tomorrow. Morning came. She went to Voss before the town was fully awake. He saw her face when she came through the back door, and he set down his tools and waited. He's alive, she said, long pause. Cole Rourke, Voss said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his hands. Lord, he said softly. He's been in the hills above the ranch for 4 nights. He has the layout, the guard positions. He knows where Farr is being held. Voss looked up. He's all right? He's older. She paused. He's the same. Voss exhaled slowly. He knew about you, knew you were here. Didn't know I was, until 6 weeks ago. He should have come to. Voss stopped himself. Then, it doesn't matter. No, not now. She pulled out the copy Ford had made. Set it on the workbench. The documents we took are under my floor, she said. But Dorn knows they're gone, which means he's going to try to move far before we can get to him. We need to go in tomorrow night, not tonight. We need the day to plan, but tomorrow at the latest. Voss looked at the copied list. Looked at her. 4 of us, he said. And Cole. 5. He was quiet, calculating. The old marshal's mathematics, positions and angles, and what 5 people could cover, and what they couldn't. The ranch, he said. 12 men. Sometimes 14. We need to know which night has 12. Cole's been watching the rotations. He'll know. Voss picked up his curved needle, turned it once, set it down. Miss Rourke. Voss, when did you last sleep? She thought about it, she said. It's Thursday, he said. I know. Go home, sleep 4 hours. We need you thinking straight tonight and tomorrow. She wanted to argue. She also knew he was right. 4 hours, she said. I'll send for Ridgway and Ford. We'll meet at your house tonight, all of us. She nodded, went home, lay down on top of the bed covers with her boots on and the Colt on the pillow beside her. Asleep in under 3 minutes, she was on the porch when she heard the horses at 4 in the afternoon. Not 3 riders, 5, and Dorn himself. She'd seen him at a distance during his 14 months in Harlan's Crossing. The silver hair, the Eastern suits, the careful walk of a man who has considered how he appears and decided to be deliberate about it. He never came to her porch. He sent men. He was coming now. She sat up straight on the step, let the sewing fall across her lap. He stopped his horse 12 feet out, the same distance his men always used. Someone had trained them to a consistent distance. That was interesting in its own way, the kind of detail that spoke to a man who thought in systems. He dismounted. He was taller than she'd expected. Something about distance had reduced him closer. He was actually quite imposing, broad through the shoulders for a thin-faced man, and the suit, which at distance read as formal and Eastern, at close range was simply expensive. The boots were exceptional. He walked toward her, not to the foot of the steps, up them. 1 step, 2. He stopped 2 steps below her, putting him at about her eye level. Deliberate. He'd done the math, Miss Rourke, he said. She looked at him. Mr. Dorn, she said. He was studying her the way she was studying him, not trying to hide it. You're taller than I expected, he said. So are you, she said. A pause that was not uncomfortable. This surprised her. She'd expected more pressure in his presence, more of what she'd heard described by the families who'd met with him. But what she felt instead was something like 2 people who've been on opposite sides of something for a while, finally in the same room. I came to speak with you directly, he said. I see that. My men tell me you have no interest in receiving offers. Your men are accurate. They also tell me you've been asking questions around town. He held her gaze. Steady. He had remarkable eyes, the kind of pale gray that suggested a lot of calculation behind them. About my operation. I'm a curious person, she said. The documents that went missing from my office 2 nights ago, he said. Missing, not stolen. She noticed that. Still in the register of a businessman addressing an administrative problem. I wouldn't know about that, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Miss Rourke, he said, I'm going to be very honest with you. Not because I owe you honesty. I don't think I do. But because I think you're a person who would rather have a clear conversation than an obscure one. And I find I'm in the same position. She didn't say anything, he continued. I know who your father is, he said. The porch, the afternoon light, the Cooper's rooster quiet at this hour, everything quiet, as though the town had stepped back to let this particular conversation breathe. She kept her face still. I know who he was, she said, past tense. Something crossed Dorn's face. Small, quick. There and gone, of course, he said. And he said it in a way that was almost too neutral, the particular neutrality of a man choosing not to say more than he's choosing to say. She filed that away. What do you want, Mr. Dorn, she said. You didn't ride out here to tell me things I know. No, he said. I came to make you a final offer, not for the property. You don't own the property, and we both know the property is the lesser matter now. He reached inside his jacket, brought out an envelope, set it on the step between them. Enough to go somewhere else. Start over. Whatever you've built here, you're 26 years old, Miss Rourke. You have time to build it somewhere else. She looked at the envelope, did not pick it up. And if I don't take the envelope, she said, then we'll have a more complicated conversation, he said. In front of a judge in a federal courtroom about the theft of private documents and the obstruction of legitimate business activity. She thought about a judge in a ground-floor corner room who'd been there 6 days. About the nature of that judge, she said. I'd want to be careful. His eyes changed. Not much, but changed, he said. Nothing, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The envelope, he said, until Friday. He turned, went back down the steps, mounted his horse. He rode away with his 4 men in the direction of his boarding house, and she sat on the porch and looked at the envelope on the step below her, and did not touch it. That night they met, all 5 of them, Wren, Voss, Ridgway, Ford, and Cole. Cole came last, through the back of the house, through the kitchen. He came into the back room, where they'd set up around the table, a lamp, paper, the documents laid out, and he stopped when he saw Voss. Voss stood up. They looked at each other across the table. A long moment. Then Voss said, You look terrible. And Cole said, You look old. And Voss said, I am old. And that was, apparently, enough. Ford Callum was looking at Cole the way young men look at legends when they discover the legend is a real person standing in the same room with the specific discomfort of having to adjust an idea to fit a human being. Cole looked at Ford, looked at Wren. She gave him nothing. He looked back at Ford. I knew your grandfather, Cole said. Ford blinked. Seriously? Briefly, Cole said. He was a better man than circumstances allowed him to be. He sat down, like most people. Ford sat. Ridgway, who had been in the corner, moved to the table without ceremony. Cole pulled the paper toward him, looked at the ranch layout Wren had begun sketching from his descriptions. 3 things we need to do, he said, and his voice, the same voice from the notch in the rock, lower than memory, slower fell into the register of a man who has been thinking through problems for a long time and knows how to talk about them. Get far out, he said. Get the full testimony on paper, and get it to the survey team before Dorn can intercept. The survey team comes in from the north, Ridgway said. If we can get far out and moving. He's 62 and hasn't walked more than a room's length in 6 days, Cole said. He's not moving fast, he can ride, Wren said. If we get him a horse, Voss said. There are 16 horses in Dorn's stable, Cole said. So we get him a horse, Ford said. They all looked at him, the youngest of them, sitting very straight, hat on the table beside him, face that particular set of someone who has made a decision and plans to see it through. We get him a horse, Ford said again, and we get out before they count heads. Before they count heads, Cole said, we need to be past the south fence. I know the south fence, Ridgway said. There's a cut in the wire line about a 1/4 mile east of the gate. The cattle haven't been through that way in 3 years, range dried up east of there. No one's checked it. Cole looked at Ridgway. You cut that wire, he said. Ridgway looked back. 3 months ago, he said. Cole looked at Wren. She looked back. He looked almost like he might smile. All right, he said. Here's how we do it. And they bent over the paper. They talked for 2 hours. She watched her father work through the plan, with Voss the 2 men across the table from each other, thinking in the same register, speaking the same language of positions and angles and fallback and timing. Voss with his bad knees and his 16 years of deferred purpose. Cole with 9 years of something she was only beginning to understand. Ford asked good questions. Ridgway corrected the layout in 2 places where Cole's observations from the ridge didn't match his from the valley floor. By midnight, they had a framework. What they had to do, in what order, with what contingencies. She'd take the east side with Cole, Voss and Ford the west coming in from the stable. Ridgway positioned above with the Sharp's 0.59ity, the elevation and patience to use it to maximum effect. You understand, Cole said to Ridgway, that if you use that Sharp's, the county is going to hear it for 3 miles. I understand, Ridgway said. I'll use it when we want them to hear it. Cole looked at him for a moment, nodded. They set it for tomorrow night. One by one they left Ridgway first, then Voss, then Ford. Cole stayed. She sat across the table from him after the others were gone, the lamp between them. Papers. Cold coffee. He looked at her. You walked into this, he said. I watched you from the hills for 6 weeks. I watched you not run. Running wasn't the option, she said. Most people would have taken the envelope. She looked at him. I am, she said slowly, your daughter. And something happened to his face at that, not breaking, nothing so dramatic. More like a very old tension releasing. Like a rope that's been pulled taut for years and someone finally let go of one end. He didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. Get some sleep, she said. To tomorrow we have work. He nodded, stood. He looked around the back room, the sewing table, the lamp, the careful small life she'd built here. He looked at her. Wren, he said. Tomorrow, she said. He went out. She sat at the table for a moment, put out the lamp, went to bed. And this time, with the plan laid out and the thing named, and the person she'd been mourning breathing somewhere in the dark nearby, she slept all the way through to morning. The 5th day, she woke at 5, dressed, went to the porch with her coffee, sat in the exact place she always sat. The sun came over the eastern ridge, sudden, all at once. That particular high country arrival of light, not gradual, not slow, just suddenly there. The cooper's rooster called 3 times. The livery sign creaked. The saloon door groaned at 6:15. On the south road she heard horses. She looked up, 3 riders. Same men as the first morning. The middle one, wide-jawed, good boots, the face that hadn't been hit enough yet. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps, looked up at her. She looked back. Friday, he said. Tomorrow. Yes, she said. I know what day Friday is. He looked at her. Long look. And this time she wasn't sure what had changed about her. What was different on her face this morning? But something was. This time he looked slightly uncertain. The professional neutral went a fraction less neutral. Mr. Dorn's offer stands. For 24 hours. I appreciate the update, she said. He looked at her one more moment. Then he turned the horse. She watched all three of them go. She picked up her coffee, drank it, cold, and thought about tonight and all the things that had been building toward it, and whether 19 years of her father's teaching was enough for what was coming. It was. She knew it was. Not because she wasn't afraid she was. The particular tight calculation of fear that comes when you're not walking away from something, you're walking into it, real and present and honest. But fear was not a reason. It was information, and she had always been good at using information. The porch, the morning light, the high country wind coming down off the Sierra Madre, that relentless, indifferent wind that moved through everything without asking permission. She sat, waited. Tonight she'd find out whether a left-handed man who'd been dead for 9 years still shot the way he used to. She thought he probably did. Some things, she had found, stayed exactly what they were. The night came down hard over Carbon County. No gradual fade, no gentle dimming. One moment the western sky held a thin red line above the Sierra Madre, and then it didn't. Just dark. The kind of dark that has weight to it. The kind that settles on your shoulders when you're standing still and makes you understand, without words, that the world doesn't care what you're about to do in it. Wren stood at the back of her house. Boots on. Belt on. The Colt at her right hip hidden tonight, not under a shawl, not tucked away in the pretense of being a seamstress, just there, where it belonged. She breathed. Once. Let it out slow. They came one at a time, the way they'd agreed. Ridgway first, materializing from the north side of the property, without a sound, the sharps across his back, a Winchester model, 1,873 slung over one shoulder for closer work. Then Voss, moving with his bad-kneed deliberateness, a coach gun broken open over his forearm, 2 shells gleaming in the lamplight from the kitchen window. Then Ford, who arrived from the south and nearly walked into Voss and said something low and profane, and Voss said nothing back because Voss was the kind of man who understood that silence was the correct response to a nervous 21-year-old making a mistake in the dark. Then Cole, he came from the west. She didn't hear him until he was 10 feet away, which was either impressive or a comment on the quality of her attention tonight, and she suspected it was the latter. Her attention was not entirely where it needed to be. It would be, it had to be. He stopped beside her. Not close. Arm's length. The way you stand when you're respecting the space between you. She looked at him in the dark. Ready, she said. Not a question. Ready, he said. The 5 of them stood in the back of her yard under the Carbon County stars, and nobody said anything for a moment. Because some moments don't need talking. Some moments are just the hinge point between before and after, and you feel it when you're in one. And the feeling doesn't require commentary. South Fence Cut is 200 yards east of the main gate, Ridgway said. I'll go in first. Get to elevation on the east ridge above the compound. When you need the sharps, you'll know. We'll know, Cole said. The stable is 40 yards west of the main house, Voss said. He was looking at the dark in the direction of the ranch 3 miles south, invisible, but he was oriented to it the way a man orients to something he's been thinking about all day. Ford and I go in through the stable side. Clear the west guard station first. Corner room, east side, Wren said. Ground floor. 1 guard on the door, 1 at the window. That's us, Cole said. She looked at him. That's us, she said. Ford was quiet. He'd been quiet all evening. The particular quiet of someone who had done his accounting, added up what he was walking into, understood the sum, and decided the answer was worth the cost. She respected that quiet. It was different from fear. Well, it was fear, but the controlled kind, the useful kind. 1 hour, she said. We go in at 1 hour past midnight. The shift change happens at midnight. New guards take 20 minutes to settle. We move in the 20 minutes after that. Everyone knew this. She said it again because saying things out loud in the dark, just before you do them, makes them real in a different way than they are on paper. Makes them yours. Makes you responsible to them. All right, Voss said. They went to get their horses, 3 miles south in the dark, no talking. The horses moving at a walk, not purely for stealth, though stealth was part of it, but because walking horses breathe differently from cantering horses, and the sound of breathing animals at a canter travels further than most people account for. She rode beside Cole, not behind, beside. She was aware of him the way you're aware of weather, not by looking directly at it, but by the pressure of it. He rode the same way, she remembered. Not loose, not tight. Just present in the saddle, the way a man is present in a saddle when he's been doing it his whole life, and his body knows the work better than his mind does. She thought, in the dark riding south, he's 58 years old, and he's been out here alone for years, and he rode 3 months in Carbon County, watching a man's operation, and waited. He waited for me. She shoved that thought into the same place she'd been putting all the thoughts that didn't belong tonight. Later, everything that wasn't the ranch, and the next 4 hours went into later. Later was its own country. Tonight she didn't live there. Ridgway had cut the south fence clean. Not ragged, not a hole that looked forced. A careful cut in the wire, folded back, held with a piece of notched wood, so it could be released and replaced in under 30 seconds. The kind of cut a man made when he planned to use it more than once. She thought, 3 months ago. He planned for 3 months. She thought, my father is not the only one who works that way. They went through one at a time. Ridgway went east and up without a word, disappearing into the dark with the sharps and the particular silence of a man in terrain he knew. The ranch compound was 200 yards north. No lights in most windows, the hands' quarters dark, the stable dark, the main house showing light in 2 windows on the upper floor and 1 on the ground level. East side. Ground floor. Corner room. Wren looked at that light. Then she looked at Cole. He was already looking at her. They split. Voss and Ford went west, angling toward the stable, moving low and slow. She and Cole went east. The guard at the east window was visible, not his face, just the shape of him, backlit faintly by the light from inside the room, standing, hands on the sill, watching the east approach, except he was looking south, because the expected threat, the threat that made sense from side Dorn's logic, would come from town, from Harlan's Crossing, from the north. South was already inside the perimeter, so east got the same assumption, checked, managed, not the problem. She'd been counting on that. Cole touched her arm. Light. The briefest contact. He pointed his left hand at an angle that put him approaching the window from the south, below the guard's sight line. She pointed at herself. The door. He nodded. They moved. She went wide, circling around the east corner of the main house, pressing against the wall, moving along it toward the door. The guard on the door was young, maybe 25, sitting on a crate with his rifle across his knees and his head at an angle that suggested he was fighting the same battle every guard fought on the 3rd hour of a night watch, the battle with his own eyelids. She got within 10 feet. He didn't hear her. 5 feet. His head lifted not all the way, just the reflex lift of someone whose body is trying to stay awake when the mind wants to quit. She said very quietly, "Don't." His hand moved toward the rifle. "Don't," she said again. Quieter. And she put the barrel of the Colt against the back of his neck, and he went absolutely still. "Set it on the ground," she said. Slowly, both hands. He set the rifle on the ground. "Stand up, stay against the wall." He stood. At the window, somewhere in the 6 seconds this had taken, Cole had done something she hadn't seen. She heard a single muffled sound, not quite a collision, more like the sound a man makes when the wind goes out of him suddenly, and then nothing. She looked. Cole was at the window. The guard was no longer visible. Not dead. She knew his methods. The guard was on the floor, unconscious and breathing. She met Cole's eyes through the glass. He nodded. She tried the door. Locked. She looked at her guard, the young one, still against the wall, breathing hard but not moving. "Key," she said. I don't have key, she said again. He reached into his coat pocket with 2 fingers, the way you reach for something when you want it absolutely clear that the fingers are all you're producing, and brought out a key on a short chain. She took it. The door opened. Small room. A cot. A washstand. A lamp turned low in the corner. The wick down to almost nothing, giving just enough light to see by without announcing itself through the window to anyone doing a routine visual sweep of the compound. And on the cot, a man. 62 years old. Maybe older, the way confinement ages people. 6 days in a small room can add years. Thin, silver-haired. He was sitting up, had been sitting up when she came in, not lying down, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he'd heard something. He looked at her. Then at Cole, who came through behind her. Then at the Colt in her hand. "If you're Dorn's people," he said, his voice steady in a way that cost him something to keep that steady, "I've already told you I won't." "We're not Dorn's people," Wren said. He looked at her. Long look. "Who are you?" he said. "We're the people who came through the south fence," she said. "Can you ride?" He blinked. "Can I? Yes. Yes, I can ride." "Then we're leaving now." He stood up from the cot. Slowly his legs had been confined too long. But he stood, and he stood straight. Judge Cornelius Farr, 62 years old, 6 days in a room, silver-haired and thin, and frightened in the way of a man who knew exactly what he was frightened of and had decided to be frightened standing up. She looked at him for just a second, and she thought, 16 years. He signed Dorn's release 16 years ago, and he's been carrying it since. Tonight he gets to put it down. "Let's go," she said. They went out the door. The young guard was still against the wall. Farr looked at him. The guard looked at Farr. Something passed between them, not recognition, but the particular acknowledgement of 2 people who've both been in the same situation for different reasons. "Son," Farr said to the guard, not unkindly, "you want to think very carefully about what you do in the next 60 seconds. The guard looked at the rifle on the ground, looked at Cole. Cole hadn't said anything since they came in. He was standing at an angle that made the Colt 1851 Navy visible without being theatrical about it. The guard looked at his rifle one more time. Then he sat back down on the crate. "Good decision," Farr said. They moved. West side of the compound, where Voss and Ford should have been, were supposed to be. Except lights. The stable, which should have been dark, had a lamp lit inside it. She could see it through the gaps in the stable wall boards, the restless movement of a lamp being carried, not set down. That wasn't the plan. Cole put his hand on her arm. She stopped. They listened. Voices low, too low to make out words, but more than 2. 3 at least. Something being moved. Something heavy on a wood floor. She looked at Cole. He looked back. Decision made in about 1 second. She signaled stay with Farr and moved toward the stable. The stable door was open 4 inches. She looked through. Voss, Ford, and Sheriff Emmett Callum, who was very much not supposed to be here, standing with a lantern in one hand and a revolver in the other, and looking at his son with an expression she couldn't fully read from this angle. Nobody was pointing anything at anybody. Yet, which meant the last 30 seconds had just happened, and nobody had made the catastrophic choice. She pushed the door open. All 3 of them looked at her. Emmett's eyes went from her to the Colt. "Miss Rourke," he said. "Sheriff Callum," she said. He looked at Ford. "I told you," Emmett said. Not angry. The voice of a man who is past anger, who has arrived at something heavier. "I know," Ford said. "I told you to stay out of." "I know what you told me, Dad." The word. Dad. It landed differently than Father would have. Less formal, more weight, more damage. Emmett looked at his son for a long moment. He was, she realized, looking at him straight on for the first time at close range, a tired man. Not a bad man, necessarily. Tired. The kind of tired that comes from making one choice that costs you too much, and then spending years paying the installments on it. He looked at Voss. Voss looked back at him without flinching. "Gideon," Emmett said. "Emmett," Voss said. They apparently knew each other. "You're going to tell me," Emmett said to Voss, "that I don't have to do this." "You don't have to do this," Voss said. "And if I step aside, then tomorrow morning your name isn't in the testimony. And the testimony is going to be thorough. Emmett looked at the revolver in his hand. He'd come here, she was assembling it, the way you assemble things when you don't have all the pieces, but you have enough. He'd come here because someone had told him. Dorn, probably. Or one of Dorn's men. Someone had told him his son was going to be here tonight and he'd ridden out to stop it. He hadn't come here to protect Dorn. He'd come here to protect Ford, which was something. Not enough, but something. Dad, Ford said. Quiet. Put it down. Emmett looked at his son a long time. Then he set the revolver on the stable railing. Stepped back. He didn't say anything else. Didn't look at Wren. He looked at Ford once more. And whatever was in that look, it was between the two of them, not for her to read, and then he walked to the corner of the stable and sat down on a bale and put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. Ford looked at him, then at Wren. She nodded toward the door. They went. Cole had far at the fence line. Ridgeway somewhere above on the east ridge. Now 5 of them were moving south toward the cut in the wire. Quick, quiet. Far moving better than she'd expected. The man had reserves. They were 40 yards from the fence when the light happened. Not one light. Several. Lanterns being lit in sequence around the compound, the stable, the bunkhouse, the main house upper floor. Someone had noticed the guard situation. Or Emmett had been seen leaving and someone had followed. Either way. Discovered. She said to Cole, "How far to the fence?" 40 yards, he said. "How far to where the horses are?" 60 past the fence. "Then we run," she said. And they ran. Far between Cole and Ford, the two of them moving him like a man being carried without being carried, not dragging, but supporting. The way you move someone who can move, but needs the pace set for them. Voss running with a kind of determined lurch that made it clear. His knees were registering their objection, and he had chosen to ignore it. Ran ahead, reaching the fence, finding the cut, pressing the wire back, holding it. "Go," she said. "Voss, Ford. Far Cole." She came through last. Behind them the compound was lit. Voices, not panicked, organized. Dorn's men were organized. She'd known they would be. She'd planned for it. From the ridge above and east, the Sharps. The sound was enormous. Exactly as Ridgeway had said. 3 miles of Carbon County heard it. It hit somewhere near the main house gate, and the effect on the organized voices was immediate. Not silence, redirection. Every head in that compound swung east and up toward the ridge, toward the sound of a 0.5 .980 caliber rifle that could reach them from a distance that made cover meaningless. 20 seconds of uncertainty. That was all Ridgeway was buying. 20 seconds was enough. They reached the horses. All 6 of them north, away from the compound, away from the noise. Far on the spare horse he rode like a man who'd ridden his whole life and not recently, and it oceaned, but he stayed in the saddle. Behind them, lanterns moving on horseback. Pursuit. 6 of them. Maybe 8. "Ridgeway," she said. "He'll catch up," Cole said. "He knows where." They rode north. Into the terrain Ridgeway knew, and Dorn's men didn't. A canyon cut a notch in the ridge that a man on foot could navigate, and a horse could navigate with guidance, and that 4 men on horseback, trying to move fast, couldn't manage without losing someone off the edge. Ridgeway caught them at the canyon entrance. She didn't ask how. He was just there, the Sharps across his back, riding his dark horse like a man who'd been riding ahead of them the whole time, and had simply chosen to wait. 2 following, he said. The others went back. 2 we can manage, Cole said. "I'll manage them," Ridgeway said, and turned his horse and went back south at a pace that didn't invite argument. They went into the canyon. Rock walls on 2 sides, close enough that she could have touched both with her arms out. The horses picked their way with their heads down, and their ears working, the particular focused trust of an animal that will go where you point it if you're asking right. Far, to his credit, didn't complain. She looked back at him once. He was pale, the bloodlessness of exertion and altitude, and 6 days of confinement hitting him all at once. But his jaw was set. She thought, 16 years carrying it, and tonight he's putting it down. They came out the north side of the canyon onto a flat approach, a high meadow, the Sierra Madre rising to the west and the sky enormous above them. She called a stop. They sat with their horses breathing around them. Voss lowered himself off his horse with the careful dignity of a man whose knees have opinions and who has decided to acknowledge those opinions privately. Ford helped Farr dismount. The judge stood in the high meadow grass and breathed, long, deliberate breaths. The kind of breathing that has nothing to do with the lungs and everything to do with the realization that you're still breathing at all. Cole stood apart, watching south. Wren walked to him. South was dark. No lanterns visible. Ridgway had managed the two followers. "It's done," she said. "Not yet," he said. "Dorn, he knows what happened tonight. He'll run or he'll fight." "He won't run," she said. "He doesn't think he has to yet. He still has men. He still has the operation. He doesn't have Farr." "No," she said, "he doesn't have Farr." They stood in the dark. "What did you mean to do?" she said. "When you had enough. Before you knew I was here." He was quiet. "I meant to take it to the territorial court in Cheyenne," he said. "Everything I'd built. All of it. By yourself. Yes, without Voss. I didn't know he was here. Without me." Long pause. "Yes," he said. She looked at the dark. "That would not," she said, "have gone well." "No?" he said. "Probably not." She almost laughed. She didn't, but it was close. "The testimony," she said. "We need Farr to write everything. Tonight if he can, before Dorn has time to get ahead of it." "There's paper in Voss's saddlebag," Cole said. He thought ahead. "Of course he did," she said, "and then we still have to go back." "I know," Cole said. "Dorn is still in Harlan's Crossing." "I know. This isn't finished until he's—" "I know, Wren." She stopped. He'd said her name. Not Miss Rourke. Not girl. Her name. She looked at him. He was looking south still, but something in his jaw had changed. "You're going to tell me to stay here," she said. "No," he said. "Good. I was going to say," he said slowly, "that I'm going to go ahead of the rest of you. Into town. I want to be there before Dorn does anything with the men he has left. And I'm going to say," she said, "that's not how this works. We go together." He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them moved. "You are," he said finally. "The most difficult. You taught me," she said. "And this time." He did, almost smiled. They sat in the meadow for 2 hours. Farr wrote. Voss held the lamp. Ford sat beside Farr and answered questions when Farr needed to verify dates information. Ford had been gathering from those documents in his father's drawer for months. Cole and Ridgway kept watch from the south edge of the meadow. Wren sat beside Farr and read each page as he finished it. It was damning. Not just Dorn, all of it. The coercion in 1871. The judge's own testimony against himself, clear and unsparing. The way a man writes when he's decided that honesty is the only currency he has left, and he intends to spend it completely. The name of the senator written out in full in Farr's careful legal hand with dates and descriptions of specific meetings and specific instructions. 16 years of architecture. On paper. In the lamplight in a high mountain meadow in Carbon County, Wyoming. She handed each finished page to Voss, who folded it and put it in the saddlebag with the careful precision of a man handling things that matter. When Farr finished, he set down the pen. His hand was shaking slightly. She looked at him. "I should have done this 16 years ago," he said. She thought about a lot of things to say. Said, "You're doing it now." He looked at her. "Is that enough?" She thought about the Beaumont family and Clara Hinshaw's spare rooms. George with his ambidextrous hands and the box under the floor that burned. Della's wrenched shoulder. The families who'd signed. The families who'd left. "I don't know," she said. "Honest. But it's what you have." He nodded. Once, like a man accepting a verdict, they came back to Harlan's Crossing before dawn. The town was quiet. Not the usual before dawn. Quiet, a different quality to it. The quiet of a place where people were awake behind their dark windows, where the word had gotten out. The words get out in small towns even in the middle of the night. Someone had talked. The stable, probably, or one of the men who'd gone back from the pursuit. Dorn knew. She knew he knew because his boarding house second story, the room that faced the main street, had its lamp on. Only room in town with a light on. She stopped in the middle of the street. Cole stopped beside her, Voss, Ridgway, Ford behind them. Farr a step further back. "Go," she said to Voss. "Quiet the survey team." Ridgway knows the North Road. Get far to them. Voss looked at her. Then at Cole. Something passed between the two old men. The kind of communication that doesn't require language because it's built from shared history and mutual understanding, and the particular clarity of people who've been around long enough to know when something is someone else's to do. We'll be back by mid-morning, Voss said. I know, she said. He looked at her one more time. Then he and Ridgway and Farr went north. Ford stayed. She looked at him. Your father's in town, she said. I know, he said. This isn't yours too. He's my father, Ford said. Simple. No decoration on it. She let him stay. The boarding house door opened. Dorn came out. Alone. Which was unexpected. She'd thought he'd come with men. Consolidate. Present force as argument. But he came alone. Down the porch steps of the boarding house, into the street. In his Eastern suit, the silver hair, the good boots. Moving with that deliberate walk she'd watched from a distance for 14 months. He stopped. 30 feet. The main street of Harlan's Crossing at 5 in the morning. The eastern ridge just beginning to consider the idea of dawn. The lamps out everywhere except the windows where people were awake and watching and had the sense not to come outside. Dorn looked at her. Looked at Cole. Something happened to his face when he saw Cole. Because Dorn had been given reason to believe, had organized his operations around the belief that Cole Rourke was dead. And Cole Rourke was standing in the main street of Harlan's Crossing at 5 in the morning with a Colt 1851 Navy in his left hand and 9 years of very deliberate patience behind his eyes. You're dead, Dorn said. Wrong man, Cole said. Dorn looked at him, then at Wren, then back at Cole. She watched him think. She could almost see it, the calculation, the assessment, the reorganization of what he understood about the situation. He was a smart man. She'd known that from the beginning. Smart enough to run a 16-year operation across multiple territories. Smart enough to build a system. Smart enough to know, in this moment, that the system had failed. The judge is gone, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. The documents. Yes. A pause. The senator, he said. And his voice changed on that word just slightly. The first hint of something that wasn't controlled. You don't know about the senator. Farr's testimony names him, she said. He named himself, Mr. Dorn. You didn't have to tell me. Dorn looked at her, and she saw it happen the moment a man who has spent his whole life knowing which way the exits were realizes. There are none. I can still. He started. No, she said. You can't. He looked at Cole. I'll give you the senator directly, he said. Everything. The meetings. The arrangements. 16 years of it. You want the whole structure? I'll give you the whole structure, not just my piece of it. What I know about him goes beyond Carbon County, beyond Wyoming. Let me go and I give you something worth. Farr already gave us the senator, Wren said. By name, with dates. And Farr is worth more as a witness than you are as an informant, because Farr didn't kill anyone. Dorn was quiet. He looked at Cole one more time, and then he did something she hadn't expected. He laughed. Short, without humor. The laugh of a man acknowledging the quality of the work done against him. Cole Rourke, he said. Left-handed. Patient. I should have known. He looked at the sky beginning to pale in the east. I should have, when I heard she was here, I should have. He stopped. Ridden away, Cole said. Yes, Dorn said. He looked at his hand. Then he reached inside his jacket. Cole raised the Navy. Wren's hand went to the Colt. Dorn brought out a piece of paper folded, held it out between two fingers. The title certifications for the Beaumont parcel, he said. The originals. Not the copies your friends took from my office. He looked at Wren. Before you arrived in my office that night, I moved these to my room. I'd planned to use them tonight. He paused. I didn't get to tonight. She crossed the distance between them, took the paper, didn't take her eyes off him, unfolded it one-handed, the documents. The originals. His signature, his seal. It doesn't save you, she said. I know, he said. I'm giving it back. It's... He looked at the street, at the dark windows. It's what's left to give. She looked at him, and she thought of Farr, writing by lamplight in a high meadow. I should have done this 16 years ago. And she thought, here is another man arriving at the same place, on the same night, through an entirely different path. Not the same. Not equal. Farr had been coerced. Dorn had done the coercing. But the moment of it, the moment of running out, looked the same from the outside. She said, "Put your hands out!" He looked at her. "Ford," she said. Ford stepped forward with the rope they'd brought because Voss had said, "Bring rope," and Voss was right about most things. Dorn put his hands out. He didn't fight it. They sat him in front of the general store, in the chair that old Perkins kept on the boardwalk for slow afternoons, which felt, she admitted to herself, slightly absurd. Aldous Dorn, 16 years of operation, sitting in a rocking chair in front of a general store in a small Carbon County town with his wrists tied and his suit dusty and the dawn coming over the ridge. Ford sat across from him on an upturned crate, not guarding, watching. She and Cole stood in the street. The town was coming awake. The Cooper's rooster called 3 times and went quiet. The livery sign creaked. Somewhere a door opened. They stood in the street and didn't talk for a while. That was all right. They'd earned the right to be in the same space without needing to fill it. After a while she said, "Voss will be back by mid-morning." "I know," he said. "The survey team accepts Farr's testimony, and the title documents it goes to the federal court in Cheyenne before the end of the week." "I know. The senator is going to fight it." "He will," Cole said. "He has money and time and lawyers. But he doesn't have Farr anymore. And a sitting federal judge's testimony about 16 years of coercion is not something money makes go away easily. It'll take time." "Yes." She looked at Dorn in the chair. His eyes were open, looking at nothing in particular. The face of a man in a middle country between what was and what came next. "He said he should have ridden away," she said, "when I showed up." "He should have," Cole said. "He was scared of you," she said. "He thought I was dead. Ghosts scare different from living men." She looked at him. "You're not a ghost," she said. He looked back. "No," he said, "not anymore." And there it was, the thing underneath everything else, the fact that had been living in her chest since she climbed up a rock face in the dark and found a gray-haired man with a left-handed Colt and 9 years of unaccounted-for life and everything she hadn't said yet. She said, "You're going to tell me you have to go." He said, "I wasn't going to say that." She looked at him. "Then what were you going to say?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was going to say," he said carefully, "that I have nowhere in particular to be." For the first time in 9 years, she looked at the dawn coming over the eastern ridge. Sudden, all at once, that particular high-country arrival of light. She said, "There's room in the back room, if you're useful." He said, "I can repair things," she said. "Voss has bad knees. He can't keep the shop going at the pace he has been." He said, "I'm not a cobbler," she said. "You're 60 miles from a cobbler that matters. Learn fast." He almost said something. He stopped, looked at the dawn. "Wren," he said. "Don't," she said. "Not yet. You'll make it too big and I'll have to argue with you about it and I'm tired." He was quiet. "Later," she said. "Later." He agreed. Voss came back at 9 in the morning. With Ridgway, without Farr was with the survey team, writing a secondary statement for the team's own records, and would be transported to Cheyenne under the team's authority. Voss looked at Dorn in the chair, looked at Wren, looked at Cole, who was standing on the porch of the general store, drinking coffee he'd somehow produced. Voss said, "You didn't kill him." Wren said, "There was no reason to." Voss said, "No, I suppose there wasn't." He sat down. His knees made their opinion known. Ridgway said nothing. He looked at the chair, looked at the dawn, went to where his horse was tied and spent a few minutes making sure the animal was properly watered, which was either genuine horsemanship or a very effective way of not having to participate in whatever was happening with everyone else. She respected that. Ford came from the direction of his father's house at 10. He'd gone there when she told him to go. She'd said, "It's done here. Go see your father." He'd gone. She didn't know what had happened inside that house, and she wasn't going to ask. His face when he came back said complicated, said ongoing, said not finished but not broken. That was enough. He looked at Dorn. "When does the marshal come from Rawlins?" he said. Voss said, "I sent word last night. By now today." Ford nodded. "And the senator," Ford said. That, Voss said, is a longer story. Ford looked at the street. He's connected. Men like that, they don't just... No, Voss said. They don't. But they also can't make a sitting federal judge's sworn testimony disappear. And they can't make 11 families' land records disappear, the real ones, before Dorn touched them. He paused. It'll take time. But it'll go. Ford was quiet. Then I want to be a marshal. Voss looked at him. Genuine? Voss said. Yes, Ford said. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then start by getting the man in that chair some water, Voss said. Because whatever he is, he's still a man, and he's been in that chair since 5 in the morning. Ford looked at Dorn. Went and got water. The marshal from Rawlins came at 2 in the afternoon. A man named Bates, 40 years old, who had the look of someone who'd been warned something significant was happening and had ridden hard to get there, and was now absorbing the reality of it with the careful professional neutrality of a man who would sort his feelings out later when no one was watching. He looked at Dorn. He looked at the documents. Wren handed him the originals from Dorn's jacket, the copy Ford had made. The summary Voss had written that morning in the back room of the shoe shop, in the clear, precise hand of a former federal officer who knew exactly what needed to be in a summary and what could wait for the actual proceedings. He looked at Cole. Cole Rourke, he said. Cole said Marshal. Bates said, there's a record in the territorial office that you're dead. Cole said, there's a record in the territorial office that Aldous Dorn is a legitimate businessman. Bates looked at Dorn, looked back at Cole. Point taken, he said. He took Dorn into custody. He took the documents. He took Voss's summary. He told them they'd be required in Cheyenne for the proceedings, the timing of which he couldn't specify but which would be, given the involvement of a federal judge and a sitting senator, sooner rather than later. He rode south, with Dorn, and just like that, Aldous Dorn, 16 years of operation, 14 months of Harlan's Crossing, silver hair and Eastern suits, and the carefully calibrated politeness of a man who understood that politeness was often more dangerous than aggression, was gone from the main street, gone from the chair, gone. The absence of him was its own thing. She stood in the street and felt it. The town came out, slowly, the way towns come out after something they've been waiting to see the end of cautiously, in ones and twos, testing the air. The general store, the saloon. Clara Hinshaw, who'd had the Beaumonts in her spare rooms, came out with her arms crossed and her chin up and looked up and down the street like she was taking inventory of what was still standing. George Beaumont came with her. He stood on the boardwalk. He looked at Wren, his two-fingered right hand at his side, his ambidextrous hands that had built a house and watched it burn. She crossed the street to him. The original title documents, she said, and gave him the folded paper Dorn had handed over. The Beaumont parcel. East of the creek. Yours. He looked at the paper. He didn't open it. He looked up at her. He said, I don't know how to. She said, you don't have to. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded. The nod of a man who has been given back something he built with his own hands and knows the weight of that. Della came out from behind Clara Hinshaw, her shoulder wrapped, moving carefully. She looked at the paper in George's hand, looked at Wren, and she reached out and took Wren's hand between both of hers and held it for about 5 seconds and let go. That was all. It was enough. Late afternoon. The town had been talking for hours, the kind of talking that builds the story of what happened, while what happened is still warm, the way communities build history in real time, each person adding their angle, their version of where they were standing when she sat on the porch. Her porch, the step she always sat on, the wood worn where she'd been sitting for 5 years. The Colt was inside, under the floor, back in the box. She had a cup of coffee. The Sierra Comadre caught the last light in the west, that particular gold that happens at altitude when the angle is right and the air is clean. The kind of gold that doesn't look like sunlight exactly, looks like something the mountains are producing themselves from the inside. Cole came and sat beside her, not on the step. On the top step, one below where she sat, the same configuration she realized that she'd used with the riders, except reversed, except him. They sat. The Beaumont parcel, Cole said, returned, she said. The other families? Voss is already working on it. The original filings are in Rawlins. It'll take time to restore the records, but it's there. The foundation of it. The senator. Cheyenne, she said. And then probably Washington. That's not ours to finish. He was quiet. We started it, she said. That's what there is. He looked at the mountains. She looked at the mountains. Pa, she said. He looked at her. She looked back. I'm still not ready to forgive you, she said. That's going to take a while. I know, he said. But I'm not, she stopped, started again. I'm not done. With this, with any of it. And you being here is. She paused. It's complicated. And I'm not asking you to stay if you have somewhere to be. But if you don't have somewhere to be. I don't have somewhere to be, he said. Then stay a while, she said. And we'll figure out the rest of it as we go. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the mountains. She looked back at the mountains. The Sierra Madre in the last light, the Carbon County sky going from gold to orange to something darker that hadn't decided what color it was yet. The wind came down off the high country, hard, indifferent, moving through everything without asking permission. She was still there. She'd always been standing when it came through. 3 weeks later, the Beaumont house was rebuilt, not by one person, by the town. George Beaumont with his ambidextrous hands directing, 12 men doing what he told them, 3 women running a kitchen operation out of Clara Hinshaw's yard that kept everyone fed from 7 in the morning until dark. Cole showed up on the second day, without being asked. He could do carpentry, she hadn't known that, or had forgotten, or he'd learned it in the 9 years. Either way, he showed up and worked, and didn't talk much. And by the end of the week, George Beaumont had decided he was all right. That was a considered endorsement from George. Voss started training Ford Callum. Not officially, the official appointment would take time and paperwork, and a territorial judge who wasn't compromised. But unofficially, the way these things happened in Contouille in 1887, a man who knew the work showing a younger man how to do it, in the practical and ongoing way of things that mattered. Emmett Callum left Harlan's Crossing quietly. She didn't know where he went. Ford didn't say, she didn't ask. Ridgway came through on Wednesdays, same as before. Sold pelts at the general store. Drank 1 coffee. Left. Once, passing her porch, he stopped. Looked at her. Said stands against wind. She looked at him. He'd said it in English. She understood. It was a name he was giving her. The kind of name you give someone when you've watched them do something that deserves to be remembered. He walked on. She sat with that for a while. 7 weeks after the night, they went through the south fence cut. October now, the high country cold, arriving properly. The mornings crisp in the way that Carbon County mornings were crisp in October, not the cruel cold of deep winter. Not yet, but the cold that told you it was coming and gave you time to prepare. She sat on the top step, coffee, going cold. Sewing a different commission now, a rancher's wife from outside town, who wanted a riding skirt with particular modifications that made the work interesting. She was on the 3rd seam. The street was quiet in the particular way of early mornings before the town assembled itself. She heard the cooper's rooster. Once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. The livery sign creaked. The saloon door groaned at 6:15. From inside the house, the sound of someone else being awake. The particular creak of the back room floor where she'd long ago noted. The boards were uneven and had never bothered to fix because she'd decided unevenness was character. Cole, making coffee from the sound of it, which was, she was not going to have a feeling about that right now. Later, she would have a feeling about it and figure out what kind it was and what to do with it. For now, she was on the porch with the sewing and the cold coffee, and the October morning. Later was its own country, and she had time. The needle went through the leather, pulled back. The thread tightened. She ran her thumb along the seam to feel whether it was seated right. It was. Down the street, no riders coming from the South Road. Just the morning. Just the ordinary sounds of an ordinary town waking up to an ordinary day, ordinary being something that Harlan's Crossing hadn't been in a long time, and was again now, and the difference between those two things was not small. She sat on the porch, not moving, because there are things worth standing for, and she was standing for them, even sitting down, even in October, even now. Some mornings, when the cold came down particularly sharp off the Sierra Madre, and the light came over the ridge all at once, the way it always did, sudden, not gradual, like a decision being made, she would set out 2 cups of coffee on the step beside her, one for herself, one for whoever was keeping watch in the hills, just in case. Not every morning, but some, because some things she had found were worth keeping. Even the things that came back when you'd stopped expecting them. Even then,